Over there?
Very sweet, yeah. Okay, folks, and since I don't know where Sahana is and it's already past 7:05 and we are here with quorum, I'm going to go ahead and call this meeting to order. Today is Wednesday, October 24th, 2018, at 7 p.m. Let the record show that Chair Sahana has shown up and she's going to take over the rest of the proceedings as we speak. Let the record show you didn't call once again.
So sorry I'm late.
No, we're not worried.
Okay, thanks.
Ms. Lee, would you please call the roll?
Sure, okay. Matthews?
Oh,
Martinez?
Present.
Malaby?
Present.
Calavita? Here. Pritchett? Present. Ramsey? Not here yet. Roberts?
Here.
Sherman?
Present.
And Yopolsky?
Here.
thank you. Present today is also Catherine Lee from the PRC officer, and from the Berkeley Police Department, we have Chief Andy Greenwood and Sergeant Cesar Malero. Thank you. The next order of business is approval of the agenda.
So moved.
Yes.
Excuse me, Chair. Two things. The special meeting minutes are in the packet, but I forgot to add them to the agenda, so we will have to, I will add that to our next meeting agenda. And then on page 39 of the packet, in the midst of all of the body-worn camera materials, there was a rogue page that got on there. So, just to let people know, that doesn't, I'm sure you guys figured it out, but I noticed as well. That's it for me.
Thank you. Are there any more? Alright, if not, include that by general consent. Moving on to public comment. Just as a reminder, you have 3 minutes for public comment. Is there anyone who wishes to speak at this time? Yes, please.
Commissioners, my name is Charles Clark. I reside in District 1. I gather last week you had a presentation from Sergeant Conby. I hope I don't contradict anything he said. What I had planned to talk about was what a resident's eye view of de-escalation looks like, especially in the context of the events of August 5th of this year. Last week, or I'm sorry, the last meeting, you might recall I showed you some photographs of what went on. There were a number of people who professed to smash fascism, and they came through the streets. And occasionally they would coalesce into larger groups, perhaps for the purpose of doing something to the people wearing red hats in Civic Center Park. Here are 2 such individuals wearing the red hats. You notice they're engaged in conversation with the gentleman in the blue shirt. That is the sort of robust speech that I think Berkeley should stand for. What it should not stand for is people carrying sticks, okay? The weapons need to go. So the main de-escalatory measure that I saw successfully implemented on August 5th was the Berkeley Police Department and their mutual aid partners separating the 2 groups, keeping separate the people with weapons from the people who didn't have weapons. And by weapons, we're talking about a longer length of 1 5/16 inch wooden dowel. So that was a good thing. I thought that was a rousing success actually on August 5th. The subject of the sound truck that was apparently seized at the beginning of the event, I hear a lot about the sound truck, and I gather you're going to be discussing it in item 9D. An Alameda County Sheriff's officer I encountered 20 minutes after it was seized told me that it had a quantity of shields similar to the ones at last August's, that is August of 2017's event. And the quantities varied depending on who I spoke to, either 33, 36, or 39. Those are also weapons. The interdiction of those weapons is another successful de-escalatory move that I believe BPD implemented. And if you're going to be discussing the specifics of that sound truck, then please do not let the subject of the weapons go unmentioned. That's an important piece of the puzzle, assuming it's true. Again, I'm going on hearsay, but you have better tools to get to the bottom of that than I do. So my bottom line is that the de-escalation that BPD did on August 5th was a success, and I approve of it. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any more public comment at this time? Yes.
Wow. Well, I was also at the August 5th protest, and I wanted to make a few observations. One, the large amount of police that were available, or at least before this alt-right protest, were there, I thought, to protect the public from the alt-right protesters, which have provoked and shown violence in the past in Berkeley, and are not really wanted. They were there to provoke, and unfortunately they were not able to provoke anything in Civic Park. But it was a very large police force that was arranged, and it was arranged almost in military fashion. We had barriers put up, and we had a relatively about the right amount of police actually in Civic Park protecting the 12 alt-right protesters, mostly from themselves. They were, I was there watching, they were trying to provoke things, but fortunately the Berkeley citizens who were there did not rise to the bait. But a much, much larger contingent was deployed around and diverting the main protest march from entering the park. And I think this was a mistake. It created an environment of confrontation that really didn't need to be. I mean, I think the deployment of the police around the protesters, I think was fine, but there was no reason to really divert them. In fact, it was almost like maneuvers. You saw the police, they would go over and block one street. I was coming up a little bit late, and you could just walk over to some other street and enter into the park. So it was not like they were really preventing people if they wanted to get into the park, but they were preventing the main protest, and that created a confrontation, I think, that was unneeded and eventually, escalation. So I think that was, I think what ought to happen in the future is rather than the police going off by themselves and figuring out a strategy based on certain kinds of what they expect, maybe they ought to be talking to the public and find some kind of way to cooperatively make sure that no violence. And then lastly, what happened that I thought was very strange was after the protest was over, all the alt-righters were gone. There were just the second group of protesters came into the park, and they were celebrating, and several of them got arrested at that point. There was no possibility of being any confrontations because all the rest were gone. Why were they arresting? And there was about 5 at least that I saw, I think, that got arrested, after everybody was gone. And all I could think of was to just get the numbers up to about 20 in the area. And I think that ought to also be looked into.
Thank you. Yes.
My name is Russell Beats, a longtime Berkeley resident. I was there August 5th myself. And from the very point at Ohlone Park, where I was on my way there to do legal observing with the National Lawyers Guild, I was told somebody was arrested already. So I hurried there and was just in time for the sound truck to get confiscated, the people inside that being arrested. I'm sorry to bother you about this, but I think it's very, 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 very important that this severe overreaction, especially with Alameda County sheriffs coming in there, and I had a confrontation. I was confronted by a person carrying a stick. He also carried a gun. He also has a badge, handcuffs. He also pushed me to the ground because I wasn't moving fast enough. I'm 71 fucking years old. You want to see me move fast? On the verge of pissed off there. I really, 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 this overreaction by the police in Berkeley and the mutual aid is really, 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 really pissing me off. I mean, y'all have annoyed me a lot before, but you're reaching new limits of annoyance. Especially the Police Officer Association coming out against Kate, anybody but Kate. You know, come on. How dare you do something like that? How dare you promoting fascism in this country, promoting fascism in Berkeley? How dare you? That's all.
Thank you. Is there any more public comment this time? All right, we can move on to approval of the minutes from last meeting. Are there any changes or objections to the minutes? If not, can we approve those by general consent? All right, so moved. For my report, I don't have much today. It's good to see everyone again. I think this is the third week in a row. For those of you who weren't here last week, we had a de-escalation training by Sergeant Fomby, which was, in my opinion, very educational. I was happy that he could come speak to us. And other than that, I just hope everyone's having a great week. Yeah, that's it for my report. Moving on to the PRC officers report.
Thank you. As far as complaints go, we still have had no complaints filed since June 29th. We do have an investigation resuming. A complaint was filed in April, but it was on hold pending the criminal case associated with the incident. That has been resolved, and we are trying to get in touch with the complainant to see if he wishes to move forward. As Chair Matthews said, we had our tactical de-escalation training, as the majority of you know. I did send the PDF of the PowerPoint, which I will be including in the next packet, and Ms. Schwartz here sent the video, which I passed along to you. You may want to consider, I don't know if you want to have the conversation now or in the future, having a presentation that Sergeant Fomby offered on special response team. Your next meeting is not until 3 weeks from now. That's November 14th. So we're entering the 2 months, November and December, where you have just one meeting.
Each month.
One meeting in November and then one meeting in December. Yeah, so 3 weeks from now, November 14th. So I'm gonna take the opportunity to take a week off, the week of November 5th. The PRC's annual work plan is on as an information item on the City Council's October 30th agenda. And there were 2 council referrals, as you recall. One of them is agendized for tonight, which is the 120-day time limit and possibly extending it. The other has to do with training, which I will agendize for November or December, depending on how much we're able to knock off tonight. And that's it for me.
Moving on to the chief's report.
Good evening. I'll go through staffing real quick. We're at 161, but taking into account people who are in academy or on leave or in training, that's 139. Our newly established recruitment team is now kind of fully in service. So that's 4 employees who are drawn, 1 from each division or department, plus time permitting, one of the internal affairs sergeants, Sergeant Cummings, is going to be spending time supporting that group. For dispatchers, we're down 5, hiring a couple next week. We did swear in 3 officers last week, 2 returning and 1 a lateral officer who was in training. As you probably know, I attended a set of conferences, which is coincidentally sort of ran into each other. NACOL conference in St. Petersburg, where I was appreciated being invited to speak on one of the panels. I found that conference to be really excellent and well received, interesting workshops, and a positive experience for me. I attended the IACP, the International Association of Chiefs of Police Conference, along with several people, including Commissioner Ramsey, I'm realizing he's not in the room. And it's a massive conference with lots and lots of workshops and classes and And then I just got back yesterday from the Women Leader in Law Enforcement Conference. That's an annual conference sponsored by the California Chiefs Association. It goes north and south, year by year it rotates. This year had upwards of nearly, I think, 900 attendees, mostly women. That is also an excellent conference with good speakers and timely information. So I'm just sort of settling back into work. We did send a number of people to a peer counseling and wellness or resilience conference, or at least peer counseling there's an emphasis on wellness and resilience last week, and I'm looking forward to seeing what they brought back from that. The issues of wellness and resilience, of trauma that's experienced by officers and by people who obviously officers interact with is really kind of rising, and I'm looking forward to kind of further understanding of that, and especially with how to, resilience being the ability for some sort of bounce back, how to set the stage for as positive outcomes as possible for our people who at this point, a new hire works until they're 57, and their statistic 57 until they retire out with pension, whereas I was hired under 3% at 50. And so the fact that a person needs to reach that older age of retirement, and research that somebody, one of the workshops mentioned that the statistics, I guess, a study shows, there's at least one study that shows that a person who becomes a police officer is likely to die 8 to 9 years earlier than a non-police officer, are sort of concerning with, okay, what can we do to develop wellness and resiliency with our people so that they can have long and fulfilling careers. So on my mind a lot. As I return, we've just started training with body-worn cameras. I haven't undergone a training class yet, but I will very likely before this week is up. I did want to sort of go out on a limb here. I've received a number of documents, including Officer Lee's October 18 memo that describes numerous issues and concerns with the body-worn camera policy. And one in particular I want to point out, there in the body-worn camera policy 425, under 425.11, the cessation of recording. The PRC, and in a separate email, Commissioner Perez-Velez also indicated concern about the discretionary aspect of the first sentence as written. And it is and has been my intention that that is to be read at, they can deactivate their body-worn camera at any time based on their discretion. It should be like when the following circumstances, or comma, sort of underline and. So I'm going to look at the phrasing for that. But I want to make it really clear. I understand why when you read it without, and I have one draft where the word and is not there, so it may be best just to delete the word and. The point is that at their discretion, when these conditions exist, then it's okay to cease recording. So it's not intended that purely based on their discretion, as a singular element or clause in that sentence, someone can decide I'm going to stop recording. And I don't want to get into a discussion on sort of on these and all the rest of them, but in reading that today, I raised up to that and realized like that's there's an underline that fell out of a draft, and I plan to adjust that. But just understand that my intent is not that you have discretion, and if these things happen, you could do it. That you could cease recording as well. The intent of that is you can cease recording at your discretion if and when the following circumstances exist. So I just need to work out the wording for that. But it was a really legitimate issue to raise by the commission, and I wanted to call it out right away to say I've got it on my radar.
So, I don't want to go out of turn, but just to understand that, are those the list of circumstances, or is that the sort of exclusive list that would be when recording can be ceased, or is it a kind of including but not limited to these circumstances? Do you know what I mean? Is it by way of example, the list, or is it only in these circumstances can we cease recording?
It's meant to be in those circumstances. So of course we may learn that there are some others, but in any case, Throughout the policy, I think different points also, there's a requirement that you document, not only that you used recording, with the body worn camera was working, but also that you explain if it gets turned off, why. And so that exists in here, and I'm on the threshold of diving in too deep, but the intent of it is that if it's not on, it's explained why it's not on, and that the section to look at to really inform when it should be on is the 425.7. So I just wanted to point that out, and again, the hazard of getting into it too deeply. And that's all I have.
Okay, we'll now open it up for questions for the chief.
So I have two comments and a question, Chief, if I may. In terms of the wellness and resilience training, Chief Tejada did a presentation at the Bar Police Department on her look on it. It might be a little bit up there, but it might be some good things that you can see what she's doing. And she was able to come into the DPCRB and to the police department and do a presentation on her own. So she's available for that.
I've already done that road.
Okay. In terms of your hiring, just to put that on your radar, BART has instituted a $5,000 original sign-up kind of bonus.
Mhm.
And if they finish the process by which they finish their training, they earn a $5,000 bonus that was approved by the BART Board of Directors. Understand, people say BART has a lot of money, but it's an incentive that is actually working. And they have already contracted external company to do some of the background checks as a way to speed up the process. I'm just putting that out there for you in terms of what all the departments are doing as well.
So we contemplate and have for quite some time a sort of a bonus program that you mentioned. One of the reasons that we pulled people to put together this recruitment retention team was to create the staff ability, the staff capacity to do the work necessary for that. So I anticipate both doing that, and right now that team has started vetting vendors for background investigations for the exact same reason, so that we can do them. We have outside vendors who are swift. We haven't signed any yet, but that's a work in progress. So we're doing that as well.
And then my question to the chief and without delving too much into it, because I know we're going to have a discussion, which is part of the agenda. And thank you for addressing the concern of the if and when possibility. I passed out to everybody here, passed around a little bit of synopsis of what I sent to the chief in discussions that I had with the Oakland Police Department when the body worn camera was put into place, and when I worked into the implementation of the one at BART, and the concerns and how the big departments like LA and LA Sheriff's Department look at the process, and then the ACLU and NACO recommendations. And the concern is that even if the if and when exists, that a definite statement sent to the police officer that it is the best practice to ensure that the body cameras are not turned off until the full engagement with the person that they're engaging with, member of the community, is completed, serves the two purposes of ensuring that all the video is captured, which can help in allegations and discussions and investigations, but at the same time, it's a question of transparency and trust. So even though the if and when might be introduced, I hope we can have broader discussion of adding language to the general order, which is specific of when that's triggered, and as an exception, not as a possibility that they can take all the time, that in most of the times, the option is to keep the camera recording until the end. And so that's my concern. You're going to address it, we're going to discuss it, and so, well, thank you very much for moving the ball forward. That's my opinion.
Are there any, yes, Commissioner Robles?
And on that point, Chief, I also have that concern. I was noticing in the original TRC proposal that we looked, for the body worn cameras. Basically, our statement was, once activated, the body worn cameras should remain on continuous direct participation in the incident is complete, or the situation no longer fits the criteria required herein for activation, and then it allows for it to be stopped during significant periods of downtime kind of thing.
I mean, well, in the section you're citing, down quite a bit. And I agree with George, we don't have to debate it here because it's a different debate, but I agree with George that there needs to be a message to the officer, hey, in the lion's share of the time, you should have your body worn camera on until you're done with the contact, something like that. I have one other question. What's the latest on the CPE report, follow-up?
I don't have anything to report on
Do what?
that. I don't have anything to report on that. Anticipate.
When is it likely? I mean, it was supposed to be September.
Right, and pushed aside by other things, so, I don't wanna give you a date, which then I can't meet.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a pretty important issue, so, I
Well-
mean, it's really, I mean, I know you have a lot of things in your plate, but on the other side, this is a pretty important community issue, and it's a pretty important policy issue on how we manage our stops, our police stops.
I don't take it lightly, focusing on recruitment and retention, which took 4 positions out of the agency to focus on that, and, I hear you loud and clear.
Are there any further questions? Yes.
It's just following up on some information requests. Our September 26th meeting, I believe, we passed motions asking for the operational specifications about how body worn cameras and iPhones work together, as well as any operating manuals and or training instructions that officers are being given. Did you get that?
I plan to provide you with, the training materials, for example, once we're done with this round of training. Because if we give you something today, but turns out over these weeks of instruction, we're gonna make changes. I don't wanna give you updated versions.
And anything
So-
about how the iPhone and the body worn cameras work together, the operational specs for it?
I'm considering it. I have to say, I don't know if it's not clear, but the iPhones don't store video. They don't store body worn camera video, and I'm a little reticent to put procedure into this policy when the iPhones are simply used to view contents of the body worn camera. So, I've heard your concern. I haven't made a final decision. I think that, well, and so, that's, I guess.
So you haven't made a decision about whether or not to provide us with the operational specs and
The operational specs.
the
you can see what that means
manufacturers sort of,
About the
just how
axle
it
and body worn
works,
camera.
how it works together, yeah.
That, I'm fine with giving you whatever information there is on the body worn cameras, on the specs.
Yeah, I
and how they
think-
interact with the software. It's probably in the public domain as well. We presented here, I brought it, were you here when I brought it? The iPhone and the Axon. I brought it to one meeting, I
I was
demonstrated
here
how
when you
it
when you
works.
brought body cameras here.
Okay.
I think what I'm really trying to pin down, I think that was sort of the intention of the information request from the 26th of September was so that we could understand what are the capacities. It's unusual, it's sort of outside of my realm of familiarity. I'm not aware of iPhones that don't record or iPhones that have limited capacities in these ways. So I'm interested if that's a home device or just how I think that if I could know something about the actual items that you're dealing with, that might help me to understand how they function in context. I think also on that day, September 26th, we had requested copies of the inventory forms that were required on August 5th, before and after the action, including those completed by mutual aid forces. We had asked for the original documents that are used as part of that inventory process.
So you want the underlying documents for the report that we gave you?
Is that?
You want the underlying documents for the report that we gave you?
I guess that's a way of saying it.
Okay.
Well,
Um,
I don't know if you wanna.
So, just, and due to vacations and my time away, I haven't had time to, take it up with, a couple folks in the organization, to look further into that.
Do you have any?
I'm wondering, I mean, you brought, I guess you brought the body worn camera in before I became commissioner. But I think it would be really helpful to this group if we could have a demonstration, like the camera and the iPhone together.
Yeah.
And to have a demonstration as to how it works, what it does, because I'm understanding vaguely that the iPhone really works to allow the officer to see what's being recorded. Is that the main?
Right, it's like a conduit, so video's not stored on the iPhone, it's a method to
Okay,
see
so
the
it
video
doesn't
that's
store-
on the camera.
But it does the audio recording, or not?
No, the body worn camera
Body worn camera?
does the audio
But it could
video
be
recording,
really
but
helpful.
I'm, like
It'd
I
be
said, it's
great.
agenda item.
It would be
That's a-
great to have a demonstration.
I think, if
Yeah,
I may
I'd be
jump
glad
in,
to.
I think the confusion is that even though the app might not allow it, the iPhone itself has the possibility and capabilities of recording itself. So if the iPhone itself, regardless of whether the app functionality allows for the videos to be downloaded and retained, we know that. The app is different from the iPhone. And the confusion that we have is because the app works separately from the iPhone itself. Are there any systems in place that are very, very explicit that say, even though you have this iPhone that might have the capability to record and to have voice recordings and video recordings,
Mhm.
the rules that apply in terms of recording, submission, review, cataloging, safeguarding, apply the same. Moreover, you will not use the capabilities of the iPhone to record independently of the usage of the app. That would be very clear to us with a demonstration, and we can move on.
Yeah.
So
I
it's,
think
it's
that's the
the
concern.
demonstration and then the issue of digital evidence, not really the body worn camera, but just the iPhone as a tool.
That's right.
What do you do with that? How's it monitored, how's it stored? Is that what you're?
Yeah.
I think that's where we are, that's what we are.
I think, yeah, just to have the concrete demonstration instead of just talking and, trying to visualize it, I'd like to see it. Yeah.
That's your-
And the other question, I think one of the things that, for me, gave rise to this desire to have more information was, question is about how easy or how difficult is it for officers who are involved or witnesses or whatever to view each other's body camera footage.
Right.
That's one concern.
Okay.
And so if it's through, description of how it works or whatever, it would just be real nice to get that information. We can ask them.
Because it adds a different dynamic. At BART, the police officers put it on the receptacle, it downloads, they don't see it unless they have clearance. This way, because you can actually view the video, what's the sharing possibilities, is it allowed, what are the restrictions, just flesh it out.
Okay, are there any further questions for the chief? Alright, if not, thank you for your report, chief.
Thank you.
We can move on to the subcommittee reports. The Encampment subcommittee.
When last we left, on October 5th, Ms. Lee, made an inquiry of Paul Budenhagen, regarding the status of revised policies regarding the dismantling of homeless encampments. So I'm curious if there has been any response.
I have not gotten a response, I was told there would be. So I'll follow up.
We can try to reconvene the subcommittee, at least for the purposes of, kind of reevaluating what the possibilities are. There are homeless encampments, that are being, rated, and, so it might make sense to reconvene and at least try to evaluate the lack of information and how to move forward based on the sources of information that we have access to.
Who's
So-
on your subcommittee?
Martin Sherman and myself.
I would suggest before we do that, let's wait and get a response back, otherwise.
Been waiting too long.
If could be, but, you know, again, we have been not meeting for a long time because I assume because of the Supreme Court decision, the city is revising its whole homeless policy. But, you know, we've been waiting for them to give us their final work or product. That hasn't come yet, so if we haven't been meeting because that made sense to do it. I would say I'll be willing to meet any time, but until we get a response back, what are we gonna talk about? Well, I got a lot of things to talk
I
about.
thought the city gave direction already. Did the city send a memo out?
It would be nice to get some information, that would be super helpful to this process.
There was a preliminary action by the council that did two things to revise the administrative regulations, and then there was first reading of amendments to the ordinance.
But in the interim, there were some instructions, right? In the interim, there also was propagating information on instructions on how to deal with encampments.
Other than, the special order that the chief issued, I did not see anything.
Okay, so this is from you, okay.
Right, and that special order was essentially, you know, don't enforce until Boise, Martin Boise gets.
Don't enforce no what, chief?
647E, the public lodging. So I issued that special order, so quickly, to, ensure that our people aren't, inadvertently enforcing when they shouldn't be, pending further analysis of the Boise decision, the Martin decision.
Based on the court decision, right? Because the court decision.
Because of the court decision, right?
Yes.
Can you, Ms. Lee, would you be willing to provide that to the members of the subcommittee if you have that special order?
The special order, it was distributed to,
Yeah, he knows, so.
it was.
Did you
it
send
might have
that?
been a
Is that the
handout.
same thing that we're talking about?
They gave it to everybody, I'm trying to remember when. I'm sorry, what was your question?
I'm sorry, I'm just trying to see if I'm speaking, if we're talking about the same thing.
Yeah.
Because we had quite a collection of policies and protocols and so forth from the city manager to
It's in
the
your,
board to the police. There was,
it's in your October 10th agenda,
oh, that's what you're talking
the
about.
first communication, page 111.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
But that, there's nothing beyond that, is there?
Nothing that I have seen or that I'm aware of.
Thank you.
Do you have it?
Well, in addition to the council items that I mentioned, the amended administrative regulation and the amendments to, I think it's BMC 1448.
Yeah, it's page 111 on the October 10th of the policy 1200. Yes, sir, of course.
Do you have anything else to add?
No, that's fine, thank you.
Moving on to the prioritizing safety for sex workers subcommittee,
He's not here.
yeah, and we haven't gotten any information on them.
Yes, but I think that Ms. Calavita wanted to be appointed to the subcommittee, is that correct? Or?
I wouldn't exactly put it that way.
Oh. Okay, let's put it this way. Ms. Calavita was dragooned into volunteering for
I was
this.
asked to volunteer and I said, okay.
So we want to be appointed?
You need to be formed.
Sure, yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Are you on it?
Yes, I am.
Oh, so the three of us?
Yes.
And the public member, Julie.
That's right.
Okay, so last week Commissioner Ramsey did ask me to start scheduling a meeting. So
Okay.
I will do that by email. And I don't know where he is, he didn't tell me he was not gonna be here tonight, so
Oh.
I texted.
Thank you.
Okay, so that's it for that.
All right, moving on to old business, number 9A, approval of the PRC annual report from 2017. Does anyone have any concerns with the report?
I'd like to move it with the clarification that Commissioner Calavita did via email to the PRC officer in terms of statistics of African Americans and white stops, was it stops or cases?
It was complainants.
Complainants, I'm sorry, my apologies.
Yeah, there was just a typo, I think, that,
Right.
the 10 and 8 got reversed in terms of the, race of the complainants.
That's correct.
Yeah.
I do have a question. There were a few typos in here. Is that something that we need to fix right now before we move it? Yeah.
Why don't we point them out? to me?
Okay. Sorry.
So can I get a second so we can discuss?
Oh, was that, yeah, sorry.
Thank you, thank you,
There's
Liz.
a motion on the floor, is there a second? Well, I'll second.
Yes.
So on page, if everyone has the loose version of it, on page 20, the first paragraph, it says PBD instead of BPD.
Oh, yes, thank you.
Yes.
Third line,
Third line, yeah.
the peanut butter department.
And then on the next page, page 21, there's supposed to be a period. In the surveillance and community safety subcommittee, that paragraph after technology, the third to last sentence, between
Yes.
technology and the commission.
Right.
And then lastly, on page 4, on page 4, paragraph 3, the fourth line of the paragraph, loss or reduction of pay, or I think it should be discharge, not discharge.
What paragraph are you on, Commissioner?
The third paragraph, the fourth line.
Yes, there's an extra D in.
It should be just, yeah, not ED.
Discharge.
Mhm. Those were the
Okay,
things I found.
okay, thank you very
Yes.
much.
Okay, do I have to like make an amendment, or are those added into the motion?
Amend the motion to include the correction of those
Yes.
typographical errors.
Is that
Okay.
Is there any further discussion?
We're not discussing the substance of this now, are we?
Now is the time if you want to.
Okay, well, I'm just, interested on page 5, the complainant advocates.
Yes,
Is that in operation? Because, you know, I was
Yes.
on the board of inquiry, I didn't see any sign of advocates.
there was not one for that, person, I'm trying to remember who that was.
So in general, they are,
They are, they've been to 3 or 4, and other.
then how does it work out that they are, is the complainant advised that they
Are
have an
available.
advocate, or
Yes.
is it automatic?
No, it's not automatic.
Okay, so
They're
they can choose
advised
not to,
that-
or, okay,
It's up to them.
okay,
Right, and then if they say they would, then we give them the information.
I see,
Yeah.
okay.
Do you tell them of the existence of that, or they have to just?
Yes.
Or they just, it's also on the website page, right?
It's also on the web, yes.
But as part of the initial interview, you let them
Right.
know that this is available?
Mr. Norris
Okay.
does that.
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry, I just remembered one more typo.
Okay.
But it was in the, former chair's introduction.
Okay,
On the
okay,
first
you can
page,
correct us later.
It says this
Okay.
report, on the first paragraph, second line, this report includes statistical, I think it's supposed to be data instead
Oh,
of
right,
data.
I caught that one already.
Okay,
Yes. Thank you.
okay. Is there any further discussion on the report?
That was George Lincoln's first page.
If there's no more discussion, I'll call a vote. All in favor of passing this report, raise your hand.
Aye.
Okay, so it's unanimous.
Okay,
Thank you. All right, moving on to 9B, discussion of the body worn camera policy. Before we begin, does anyone have any strong feelings about how to go about this process? Anything they'd like to begin with? All right, if not, I can open it up to, anyone who wants to address any specific topics within the policy. Yes.
I would suggest that we, start off at least by focusing on the subset of issues that were identified, by Ms. Lee in her memorandum, which I think were the areas of, disagreement between the existing, Lexwell policy and the PRC proposal from some time ago.
So would it be best just to go through each one?
That's fine with me.
Okay. So we'll start with,
Can I ask a question then? I'm sorry, Miss Lee. Would it be pertinent to have Miss Lee just give us a little bit of a synopsis on her memo, since it is her memo?
Yes, yes.
Because there were 4 issues, but 2 have been already cleared, there were 2 that were quasi-outstanding, so maybe we can start there.
Yeah,
We're on nine B right now?
yes.
Sorry, Ms. Lee.
That's okay. Well, first, okay, you know, there were a set of handouts that I gave you, which consisted of, the chief's email with 2 attachments. So the policy is now numbered 425, not 424, but the sub-numbers are still the same, so we should still be able to discuss the policy. And also the red line version. And I appreciate your sending that, Chief, but I think given that, there's been another, now that the final version has come out, and I already did the analysis comparing the PRCs with the final, that we probably won't be spending a lot of time looking at that.
Yours. I understand about the trail of graphs, and my intent was to follow through with my commitment.
Okay.
So it's clear to the
Okay.
PRC, the outcomes of the meeting, and, so,
Okay.
I'm fine.
Okay. And then I also handed out emails to and from Mr. Channon about the issues that he raised, about the new policy. So just wanna say that first. I think my memo,
So, I'm sorry, which memo are we talking about?
so let's look at the October 18th memo, my memo, starting at page 15.
Of the agenda.
Yeah, the agenda, today's agenda packet.
What page, I'm sorry?
Page 15. I think. Oh, you got it, okay. I think the packet pretty much, I think the memo, you know, pretty much speaks for itself, but I will let me go through A through E. So these are the issues that the department and the commission were not in agreement, as of last April, which is the last time that we had seen, the policy before it was just issued. So the first was the use of mobile recording devices other than department-issued body-worn cameras. And the commission had a concern that, those other devices were not covered, and wouldn't be covered by the policy. And the department said, well, if the body-worn camera either isn't available or isn't working, then they would still like the officer to be able to use their personal, we're calling them personal owned recorders. You know, 99% of the time, that's gonna be their, cell phone. And so, the only issue here is that, not the only issue, but an issue is that the policy that we last saw says that their personal, I'm just gonna say cell phone, can be used where the device fails or isn't functioning. And the current policy 425.13 says they cannot use their personally owned recorders unless there are exigent circumstances that warrant the use. So, to me, it's not really obvious what exigent circumstances are, and it might be nice to have some examples. So that was my recommendation there. Issue B, release of recordings to the PRC. We've had some back and forth on that, and the current policy will allow both Mr. Norris and I to have direct access to video that's related to a complaint investigation. And so that's great. There isn't, we will have it at the BOIs. we're gonna have to work out just, you know, technologically how that works, but I'm sure we could do it. We'll work on it.
So do you still have to go to the police department to?
No, we don't have to, we will, from our city issued computers, have an account
Oh, I see, from the.
And then-
To evidence.com,
to, is it evidence.com? Okay,
I see.
right. And, there was an audit trail, so they'll be able to, you know, the department will be able to see when and what we access. We can only access from city property, we don't have a problem with that. I think something to work out is if we want, so we'll have it for the purposes of our investigation, it will be available at the BOI. The question is if we want BOI members to be able to see it before the hearing, how does that happen short of you coming to our offices? So right now I see that as the way it's gonna work, because video will not be released outside in any form outside the city, under the current policy. I wasn't clear, and maybe you can answer this now, Chief, on whether complainants and civilian, we can show it, for instance, when Byron's interviewing the complainant or civil, I assume that it's okay for him when he's interviewing the subject officer to look at the video with the subject officer.
Yeah, I need to circle back and
Okay.
look at notes, but
Okay.
that's reasonable, I think.
All right.
Make some time. Just
Okay.
as the internal affairs sergeants are gonna be able to look at the video with the complainant, it's a common sense.
Exactly, it didn't seem to make sense that they could see it with the complainant, and, so, okay.
Can I make a suggestion, just in terms of the process here? If we're marching through if we're gonna be marching through a number of
Uh-huh.
kind of policy differences, your summaries are really, really helpful, to me anyway. I'm gonna forget the ones for policy 2, 3, and 4 by the time we get to them.
Yes.
Can we just start with the first one that you outlined, which
each
is
one.
the exigent circumstances, and then after we're through that, you can kind of, you know, give us the overview of the next one and so on. Is that okay?
Well,
We're gonna work that
I'm
out.
not exactly sure what you're asking.
He's asking if, when you go through each point, can we stop and discuss each point?
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Exactly.
Yeah,
I'm fine with that.
So,
Yeah.
we'll forget your very.
Get your break in between.
Yes.
Okay, so we can, discuss number A, the exigent
Exigent
circumstances,
Sure.
It's number A.
The exigent
number eight.
circumstances,
and that is
Issue
in.
2A.
using personal recording devices.
Right.
Mhm.
A.
42513.
It's on the bottom of page 15.
Okay, yeah,
Is
yeah,
of
yeah.
my discussion. Okay.
Yes.
So
So-
I've already,
Could we hear how and why it was decided to change it from, if the body worn camera fails or is not working properly, that would be the circumstances in which a person would use their personal device? How did it get changed to exigent circumstances?
So I'll do my best to answer, but I don't have notes in the previous drafts. I don't recall exactly how it became exigent circumstances, but the idea was that we want people to use their body worn cameras to do reporting. And in that paragraph under 42513, paragraph 3 of the policy, I just want to point out this language I felt was very affirmative about if other devices are used, that'd be documented. So regardless, I'm going to just read from it. So regardless, if a member is using a department issued or another recording device, members shall comply with the provisions of this policy, including retention and release requirements. In every event where members use any recording device aside from or in addition to their department issued body-worn camera, the member shall document and explain the use and the exigent circumstance in their police report, parentheses, for example, the body-worn camera failed and evidence needed to be captured at that moment in time, close parentheses. So I do indeed recall that I felt like that language covers if something other than the body-worn camera is being used, if you're following this policy, it all applies, and you are supposed to document in your report what happened and why. The word exigent typically means emergency. so an emergency or some situation that can't be remedied in the moment. And so that's my sense of the word exigent. And I feel like that paragraph really covers, I mean, I'm not sure what, it's the policy itself.
It's page 32.
It's the policy 425.
Page 32.
Okay. I do want to.
It's 425. Okay, 424 or 425, not 13, and
On your new handout,
yeah.
it is page number 6.
6 of the handout.
So I felt like that language kind of is a coverall for, regardless of the device you use, report it, document it, and explain why your body worn camera wasn't used in that device.
And to be fair, it's all over the place in the Bay Area in terms of restrictions. Some police departments allow this, some police departments don't allow it. The balance here is if the camera malfunctions and you cannot get to a terminal to retrieve a new one, you lose the ability to record the interaction.
Right, I
So-
think
so
that's
that's-
great, I
so
just think
that's
it
the
should be
balance
put
here.
in there instead of being open to discretion in the circumstances. In the case that the body worn camera fails, you can use personal device.
Is there any provision or any kind of supervisor, so if there's an emergency and an officer uses their personal device and in the processing of that evidence, is the supervisor required to bear witness to the deletion of that footage after it has been captured and archived?
Not that I'm aware of. Where a supervisor bears witness to video being deleted.
Correct,
From the
so if
device?
I have my own cell phone
Mm-hmm.
and I provide this evidence to the department,
Correct.
but how, what sort of security exists to make sure that that footage is then deleted from that phone and secured, shall we say?
yeah,
If it's evidence, it seems like it shouldn't be easily shareable.
Well, I mean,
Well, help me, I'm asking.
Yeah.
sure, I mean, she can answer, I can guess at it, but she can.
Should I have fallen to 425.14?
I mean, it seems to me that where it reads that members shall comply with the provisions of this policy when using something that is not the body worn camera,
Sure.
to the extent that it's part of the policy that you secure the footage, they're required to comply with it. And then at the same time, what would, the earlier part of 424.13, says that members are prohibited from making personal copies of recordings. So if you use your personal device, that suggests to me that you are not allowed to maintain that copy after it is uploaded or
But
whatever
if
the
it's
process
the
is.
original, you have to make you have to,
Upload it. to
you have,
your-
there has to, a copy has to be made.
Yes, right,
So it's the original that has to be deleted.
correct. That would suggest.
I guess it
Because
doesn't seem explicit.
processing and handling of recordings doesn't specifically address not the body worn camera itself, but addresses what it is to be done with the recording or the disposal and tagging and putting with the report. Because if you do a personal recording of a video in your camera and it gets displaced out, that will certainly open the disciplinary process, because in the usage of the cameras, it automatically says that it's not to be shared, recorded, or used in any other manner. That is prohibited. So if we're going to assume that a police officer is gonna keep the recording to put it out there, then the police officer will have to deal with the consequences. So I'd rather take the view that the restrictions are in place, not take the view that the police officer is gonna act in bad faith.
On that point, yeah, I mean, our original concerns were, Chief, about the safeguard of the information, of course, on personal devices. And I think, looking at your red line here, it seems like it pretty much covers what we originally were trying to get at, except for the definition of exigent circumstances and the fact of how the functionality, I think is what George is getting at. If I do something on my own iPhone, how does that get loaded, uploaded, tagged on the Axion system in some way, and then erased out of the person's iPhone? Who supervises that? How does that work and all that? I mean, if there's a clear policy for that, and we can get a definition on exigent circumstances, to me, that would pretty much take care of the issues we originally raised. Because I think Ari was pointing out, they're prohibited from retaining recordings and other things that we're worried about. So I think the policy covers that. But it's just those two things that are concerning to me.
So we're talking about malfunctioning, we're talking on the processing and handling of recordings, the same line that says the storage capacity of the DAW is nearing its limit, whether it reaches its limit by some reason and then it can no longer record. Is that when that possible functionality of the issued iPhone to the police officer, which is the property of the police department, and therefore under the jurisdiction and restrictions of the police department, would that be the other recording camera that can be used? So there's a window there to flesh that out as well, if that's the case. Yeah, the cell phone.
Do they have to surrender their cell phone? Is anybody else involved in that process?
In the context of like an officer-involved shooting?
Yeah, I mean,
Well, that's a if
it's a personal recording device, does that officer surrender their camera?
under what?
So that's the question.
I think you're being asked about the procedure, right, rather than the
Right.
policy, like, what are you going to do?
So, for an officer-involved shooting, for example, I expect that the body-worn cameras of the officer who fired their weapon and the witness and present officers will be gathered by a supervisor at the scene.
In addition to, if it's on their personal recording device,
Well,
should we expect that would happen
I
as
think in
well?
real life what happens is there's a shooting, and once the officers have made it code 4, the supervisor will show up and, we take the officer's weapon and so forth, and I anticipate that we'll be taking all the body-worn cameras collected right there.
But let's be clear, because I'm going through an investigation with police involved shooting in the bar. What are the chances that in a situation that is so high stress, the police officer is gonna take the camera to record it when the weapons are drawn in a police involved shooting? That's a little far-fetched. So let's just be clear that, I'd rather we have a discussion on what happens if the police officer doesn't activate the camera in a police involved shooting, and whether that's in the general order and what the consequences are because it's a deadly use of force, instead of just reaching out to say that if someone's gonna record it in a police involved shooting when they're in such a high stress decision, and they're gonna pull up a personal camera to record the incident. That's ridiculous.
Well, with that-
I just think we need to be practical how we discuss this, because when we keep on reaching out to what can happen, or what, and I hate to say this, and my apologies if it sounds a little harsh, conspiracy theories, we're gonna be here all night.
If I may, Chair, last week on the 17th of October, we were actually sat through videotaped fatal encounters. Now, somebody on that scene videotaped those. What officers, yes, they can be witnesses, yes, there can be a prolonged situation. So I actually don't think it's quite as far-fetched as my fellow commissioner would have us believe. And I think sort of the point of reviewing some of this is trying to account for some of the actually less common situations, but yes, possible. And I am interested in how we account. I think my underlying concern is how we can ensure and secure evidence that is gathered in these non-traditional, it's not about the body camera. The introduction of the iPhone was, to be honest, I don't think that we have had time we've been trying to gather enough information so that we could actually study what that interaction might look like, and what best practices around securing that evidence might look like. And honestly, what I'm concerned about is if an officer, actually does take some, and that they share it, and they say, well, this is what it looks like, okay, blah, blah. That's what I'm concerned about, and I would like some assurance, as a member of the public, I would like some assurance that evidence is gonna be treated and secured.
And I agree with you, I mean, I just think, it is courtesy, improper arrest, detention, might be instances in which that might prove a little more practical. A police-involved shooting might not be the perfect, might be not the best example by which going through the extreme might not prove the basis by which we need to reevaluate the policy, because extreme never proves a narrative. It just creates a different one.
So
Just creates a different
what I'm
one.
saying, in terms of the concerns that you just raised, I think those are two separate issues. One is, are officers allowed to, under the policy, to review their recordings? Are they allowed to look at one another's recordings? And the answer to that, except in the instance of officer-involved shootings, appears to be yes, according to the current lexical policy, right? So just so we're all clear, that's what the policy is, as it stands. On the second, I'm sorry.
Say that again, Art.
My understanding is that in a
If
serious
it's an officer
incident,
involved shooting.
Except-
With the exception of an
Except,
officer-involved shooting,
I agree.
I can look at the footage that I take, I can look at the footage that you take, and anybody else in this room takes, right?
Yeah.
And-
Under there,
Unless
this
it's
policy?
Correct.
That's not the way I read it.
Yeah.
I didn't mean-
I did,
Yep.
unless it's a death or serious injury
Right.
from a shooting.
No, not from a shooting.
Yes.
In
No,
custody
but
death.
officers-
Yes, right,
Well,
yes.
yes.
Well, that's
Okay.
asphyxiation, that's.
Great,
what
great,
we-
great, great
But
bodily
unless
injury, I think
it's
is what it
death
talks
or
about.
grave bodily injury,
Yeah,
they can be shared
yes,
among the
Right.
officers, yeah.
right. So that's one thing, that's one issue, and I think the policy pretty much resolves it. Whether it's to everyone's satisfaction or not is a different question. The other issue is the way that the evidence is secured, and the policy spells that out, about the way that the evidence is secured. What we're
Unless
asking,
unless it's on a personal device.
unless it's on a personal device, but I mean, the policy also has guardrails in it that suggest what the treatment of that would be. Everything on a personal device is subject to the policy, to the provisions of the policy, right? And so if the evidence on a BWC needs to get uploaded to evidence.com, then the same evidence on your personal recording device would need to get uploaded to evidence.com, right? If you're not allowed to keep it under the policy on your personal device because you're not allowed to keep it for personal use, that would suggest to me that it would be a violation of policy to do so.
So if I'm an officer, if I have evidence on my cell phone,
Yes.
would I expect my supervisor to tell me to forward it to evidence.com from here? Or would my supervisor actually take my cell phone?
I think that in the normal course, and I'm sorry for freelancing here, Chief, in the normal course, unless it's an officer-involved shooting, your cell phone is probably not gonna be confiscated, right?
So you're saying in an officer involved shooting, it would be confiscated?
Pursue it.
Potentially, I think it's
And
investigative.
I'm just saying, should this not be in the policy? Should we spell this
Well,
out?
Yeah, I agree that that's a question. That's what I was talking about, how you actually make that happen.
I think it's impossible to derive and develop a policy that addresses, every single sort of possibility, and that's why this language, for example, you sort of call guardrail language, I feel like that really conveys the thing. That it really conveys the expectation of the policy regarding materials captured on a device other than your body worn camera. In terms of officer involved shooting, the fact of the matter is that officers flood in, isolate, and bring away the involved officer, and they're under sort of constant accompaniment, I don't want to say surveillance, but there's not a space where people are wandering around by themselves, involved parties are wandering around by themselves. So I would think that if that, as part of just that process and the context that supervisors, commanders would have in the midst of the opening steps of the investigation of an OIS, that if it came out that, so-and-so used their camera to take video whatever, or took some photographs, they're on the scene, like the incident happens, and then an officer, which is kind of far-fetched, they pull out their camera and start taking some photographs,
Why is that?
it's not gonna,
Well, I mean,
it is, I'm telling you it is.
well, if
Based
I
on my
may,
experience with officer
the
involved
last
shootings.
person who died in police custody died, it wasn't an officer involved shooting, it was somebody who stopped breathing,
Right,
had a 5150, Kayla Moore. So that was that situation, I could easily imagine one of the 6 officers taking a step back to document the situation. Maybe they're trying to document their practices.
I
Maybe
can-
they, I mean, why is that so far-fetched?
I think,
And so
I
I'm
really
asking,
think
what
we
would
should-
happen to
I
that
think
cell
we this
phone?
brings up all the time. I don't know why we're litigating Kayla Mueller again. Kayla Moore was something that we heard.
It's
is-
not what I'm saying, it's
but
not an
we bring
officer
it up all
involved
the
shooting.
time as a way to just browbeat possible bad behavior of the police department, and it has been proven, because we had an investigation here, and an investigation by the DA's office, that was not the case. So I really think that when we have policy discussions, we need to base them on information which is factual and the truth. No fake news, because it really
Whoa,
colors the narrative.
whoa,
Hold up
Colors the
there,
narrative.
hold up there.
It is
Colors
fake
the
news.
narrative.
She's
It
not-
really color a
She was not
narrative.
fake news.
No,
Commissioner.
but the accusation the police officer
There was
made
no
something like that.
accusation. I made no accusation.
You know, Willie, let's not talk about Kayla
I'm
Moore
sa-
anymore.
I'm sorry if that offends you, but the
It
fact
doesn't
is that
offend me,
if
because
we're
I'm a member of
only,
the LGBT
are we
Moore
talking
got no
about
offense.
only officer involved
ain't getting
It
shooting?
no
offends me that you bring it up over and
Sorry.
again, over again. You bring this,
Commissioner President.
I understand. It just,
No,
can we
this
just
is
move
not,
on?
yes, we're gonna move on.
Can we just move on?
Can I make a
you
suggestion
move
for moving
loud?
forward?
Yes.
So,
No,
one
you
of the discussion point that we started off here talking about was the exigent circumstances thing.
Yeah.
And if we could have a situation where it added into this policy, an example, exigent circumstances, comma, such as the failure of the body worn camera. Go, and then, just to add that in, to show that we're talking about some kind of serious failure.
No more storage.
Okay, the other comment I'd like to make is, these are policies, so there's different levels. There's policy, there's procedure, there's practice. So I would propose that let this thing move. I have some concerns about some of these other policies. But in terms of the procedure of what you do in this kind of situation as compared to that kind of situation, I think it needs to be put into practice, and then we can get a report back. How are you dealing with these personal cell phone issues? Who takes them? Those are the nitty-gritty of the procedures. We're looking at policy here on a higher level. And so I think if we start arguing about the procedures in the details of different cases, we're gonna finish next year. And so I think we need to focus on the policy. Once it's put into play, we can get the chief back to tell us how the details of how you get the personally recorded information from the officer, those kinds of things. But for now, I think we have to look at the policies.
So you made a suggestion about the exigent circumstances. Do you want to make that into a motion?
Yes.
Specifically, what would you like to add?
Add to the policy, after exigent circumstances, comma, such as the failure of the body worn camera, comma.
There's a.
Lack of,
And
capacity nearing its limit, recording capacity.
Yeah, and
whatever they think exigent circumstances are, right? It's like, well, what's their list? You're saying failure of a camera,
well, I would like to
what's their
propose,
intent?
I would like to propose that be inserted to demonstrate we're talking about some necessity rather
Yeah, yeah,
than something
okay, yeah.
discretionary.
Right.
How about, yeah, okay, never mind, that's fine. There's a motion.
That's fine, yeah.
Is there a second to the motion?
I just have a question.
Sorry, there is a motion.
Sure, yeah.
Yes, second? Okay, thank you.
I have a question.
Yes.
When we're talking about, so, just to be clear, there's a body worn camera on that officer. That officer also has a department issued iPhone. And they also have their own personal device.
Mhm.
Is that what we're all clear about?
So,
So, cause it seems pretty far-fetched that that the body worn camera and their iPhone, their department issued iPhone, is going to be, whatever, disabled. So that seems odd to me.
Well, they might both reach their limit at the same time.
Right.
Since they're in coordination. I don't know.
I don't know. You know, without
So-
seeing the objects, it's kinda hard to know.
But I think my amendment takes care of your concern, suggesting that this is an extreme circumstance.
So, maybe not, then this is a question to, I think, to the chief and whether you've considered it or not. So, the policy speaks in terms of personal, personally owned recorders, e.g. personal cell phones. But as, the Commissioner Pritchett was just saying, the iPhone itself is a separate recording device. Now, it's department issued, it's not a personally owned one, but you could imagine a circumstance and where somebody might be recording with that. I'm not talking about an officer involved shooting, but I'm just saying that that may be the tool that is used rather than the one that is on your chest, right, in terms of the recording.
If your body worn camera is broken or it's not functioning.
Right. It's not clear here, and, sorry, the, my going assumption, tell me if this is wrong, is that things that are footage that is taken in the iPhone itself outside of the Axon app happens outside of the normal stream of this process, right? So it's not the automatic upload, it's not the,
Right.
that process looks like the same as a personal device.
Right, just
Right.
managing digital evidence in whatever form.
Right, but it's akin to a personal device, even though it's on the department issued phone,
Yes.
right?
It doesn't matter personal or department, the point is there's some digital evidence on a thing.
Exactly.
What are you doing with it, where are you putting it, how are you documenting it?
Precisely my point. The policy does not say that. The policy talks about personal devices that are owned by you, right? And I think that to take account of that circumstance, either, I'm not sure what the language is immediately, but that it should be both personal phone and it should be the department issued iPhone. The point is that it's outside of the regular recording process.
Do you want to try to add that to our motion now, or take that up after we finish this motion?
It looks like it's already in there, Harry. If you look
Where's
at, I'm looking at 450.6. Paragraph 3. I'm looking at the red line stuff.
The red line.
Yeah, paragraph 3. It says,
I'm sorry, 450.6.1?
no, the third paragraph, does it look like?
The
it's
red
on
line.
The red
Okay.
line. If you read
Page
that,
6 on the red line.
looks like it's on discussing.
Yeah.
I couldn't think of the good one. I couldn't think of the good one.
Oh, it's in our,
It's in this.
Oh,
You just handed it out.
yeah.
sorry.
So where is it that it's
It's right here that it's talking about, personal owned recordings.
Right.
Members may not use blah, 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 and it goes on, and it indicates that, and I think that sort of ties into it, doesn't it?
Right, but by identifying it as a personal owned recorder as opposed to a department issued phone, right? Or a department issued recorder, that suggests that if you take footage on your iPhone that is issued by the department, right? Not on the Axon app, but on your regular iPhone, on your camera setting, then that would fall outside of this policy. There's no provision in for it, in other words.
On that point, I was looking at the paragraph above, members are prohibited from retaining BWC recordings, blah, blah, blah. So, what you're saying is we should put BWC or iPhone, or a department issued iPhone recordings.
Wait, say that again?
I'm not sure what you're talking about.
You're taking issue with respect to the body worn camera
Yeah.
versus the department iPhone, right? And so this relates to prohibited use, And maybe we ought to put in there, in that second paragraph, something about the iPhone, the city-issued iPhone. Not just BWC, but it's a city-issued iPhone.
Does it have to be specific to iPhone? It cannot be just recording device?
Could be,
So,
city recording device, yeah.
so what I understood you were saying is that, whenever it says a personal device, we should be saying personal device and department issued device, or department issued iPhone.
The point is that the restrictions of the policy and the rules of the policy apply to what is taken on the body worn camera. The iPhone that you have is a separate recording device,
Yeah.
right? And to the extent that it's issued by the department and is not a quote personally owned device, it is not covered by this restriction. Using the department issued iPhone is not covered by the restriction, right? And so what I'm saying is that there's a pretty minor tweak in the language to make it cover that.
Okay.
So,
Hello?
yes.
I think if I'm an officer and I have a department issued iPhone, that there's already a way, I would imagine, to upload footage directly to some app or something, to put it onto evidence.com and procedures for doing that, because they interact. My question, if I was an officer and I had, maybe I had left the iPhone somewhere else, but all I had was my personal device. I'm curious about how what the policy, as an officer, I might be like, no, you can't have my phone. Is it that we want is it possible? And maybe this is a technical question, but I feel like somewhere we need to account for how the evidence collected on a personal device will be secured.
So I
So
want
that's a different question, I think.
I want to stop this conversation for a second and go back to the motion that is on the floor, so that we can take action on this, because the conversation has, gone.
Just ask a clarification. They still have not got BPD issued iPhones. The iPhone has been around here for a while. Have they been used in the manner that we're talking about?
I've seen officers using iPhones to record at protests and in various other situations, so I have observed that is a practice. So
So-
I'm not sure how they handle those.
Well, that might be something we want to find out. And we'll
I'm
consider
open to learning, if somebody wants to tell us, but we were recently informed that I guess those kind of recordings up until now have been okay, but we have no information. I think the chief mentioned that he might be willing to look around and see if there was any.
These are on private phones, so.
Correct.
The chief or anybody else might not even know. Well, officers watching his partner make an arrest or stop and detain, what have you, and he's sitting there, just, I'm gonna check this out.
Well, I have to say, as
I mean, it's not like it's,
I
I
find
guess
it-
what
I
I'm saying
find
is I
it-
can't imagine this has not been done
So-
before under private phone.
I'm gonna stop for a second because we do need to address the motion that's on the floor. Ms. Lee, would you mind reading the motion back? We can come back to this conversation.
To recommend amending, adding to the policy after exigent circumstances.
Such as
Four
failure.
25.13, such as the failure of the body worn camera or lack of capacity.
And just as a,
Comma.
just as a clarification, is that just after the first exigent circumstances?
So it's 425.13, third
Third
paragraph. At the end of that sentence, members may not use personally owned recorders to document contacts unless exigent circumstances exist to warrant the use of personally owned recording devices, comma, such as
Oh, okay.
body-worn camera failure or
Lack of capacity.
termination of capacity or something.
Yeah.
I
Is
think
there-
lack of capacity.
Lack of capacity, yeah.
Is there any discussion on the motion?
Well, yes, I'd like to, I don't know if it's a friendly amendment or otherwise,
suggest, some language to account for the circumstance that I was trying to describe.
And how would you
And
say that?
I would say that,
You got, this is an amendment?
Friendly to this?
yes.
Okay.
Yeah. I would say, so in that paragraph, members may not use, rather than saying personally owned recorders, just say may not use recording devices other than the BWC, which would capture your personal cell phone, your department issued iPhone, right?
Okay.
To document contacts unless exigent circumstances exist to warrant the use of other recording devices.
Could you repeat that, please?
What paragraph are you on there?
Same paragraph.
Paragraph 3, same one I was
Number 3?
mentioning.
Members may not use
Yes.
personally?
Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
So members may not use
recording devices,
devices other than
the BWC.
body worn camera. Delete the e.g. personal cell phones, right?
Wait, but does that also allow for them to use the department issued iPhone, or are you trying to strike that?
I'm trying to strike that. And we're trying to.
I'm trying to broaden it so that the restriction applies in the same, it clearly applies in the same way to the department
You mean to any other, but it's personally on a department note, it seems like the issue is, what's the policy if it's not the body worn camera?
Exactly.
Just keep the
exactly
principle clear, so whether it's
Exactly.
personally owned or not.
Yeah, just trying to put it all together.
Right,
to clarify.
I'm trying to
Yeah.
track
Yes,
this.
so I accept that friendly amendment.
Is any device that can record, regardless of what it is?
Yes.
Wait,
So there is an amendment, and you accept the amendment?
Yes.
I'm just trying to see within the paragraph, there are other places that need to be, that refer to personally owned.
Commissioner Fisher?
I'm kind of surprised that folks are seeing those as the same thing. That a police officer with their own personal iPhone in their pocket, that those would be, that would be treated the same way as a department issued phone if it had evidence on it.
So I think what we're saying is that there is, in the policy, it talks about your personally owned phones, but there's nothing that talks about the department owned phones. So we're adding the department owned phones into here, so that they are also under the same policy. Otherwise, they wouldn't really be accounted for within the policy. So that's all we're trying to do.
And this is very specifically in the context of the restriction in the policy that says you cannot use any other device except in exigent circumstances. Okay?
And it
Yes,
doesn't count
Commissioner
for how
Roberts.
You know, I'm thinking this through, because we have other things to go
Yes,
through.
we know about it.
You know, maybe, because Ari's saying, well, maybe there's other places in here that need to be fixed.
I don't think there are.
But, you know, maybe we're better off to take these things and say, we recommend that the department do the following in this section or something or other. And that is define exigent circumstances, allow, you know, state how the personal devices would be, you know, the personal device information would be better, can be, safeguarded, or something like that, in each area. And then we would submit that, rather than try to wordsmith and make sure all the i's and t's are put dotted and crossed while we're sitting here. That gets a little dangerous, because we miss that. Anyway, that would be a suggestion, rather than try to wordsmith it. We'd give our important points about what should be done here, something like that.
As the maker of the motion, do you have an
I mean, if you have the exact wording or something, that's fine, but,
I
and
think
we
in
feel
this
confident
instance-
that,
I think in this instance, we have the exact wording, and I would also point out that up to now, we've been talking, up until 2 minutes, the last 2 minutes, we've been talking about the concept and not the wording.
yeah.
So we haven't really been wordsmithing, we've just been going back and forth about, you know, what it
Yeah,
is that
yeah.
we're all talking about. Anyway, I think that I think the wording in this instance is
Right.
is pretty clear. And there aren't other instances as I was thinking there might be.
I think we're there.
Right, Ms.
Yeah,
Lee,
great.
would you please read the motion back one more time?
Okay, well, let me just read how I think it's going to be reworded, which is members may not use recording devices other than the body worn camera to document contacts unless exigent circumstances exist to warrant the use of, are we repeating that language?
Such other recording devices.
Such other recording devices. For example,
No, I
such
would just
as.
say to warrant their use, just say to warrant their use.
Unless exigent circumstances exist to warrant their use.
No
Refer-
other recording devices can be used unless exigent circumstances exist to warrant their use.
Oh, their
comma,
use.
Such as.
Their use, comma, such as, failure of the body worn camera or lack of capacity.
Yeah, that's it.
That's it.
Is there any further discussion on the motion?
Should you say recording capacity or capacity?
The more general.
Yeah.
Capacity, actually.
Doesn't matter.
All right, if there is no more discussion, I'll call it to a vote. All in favor of this motion, please raise your hand. All opposed? Abstentions? So moved. Okay. Is there any further discussion on item A before we move to item B? From Ms. Lee, Ms. Lee's memo.
Moving on to what?
Moving on to number B.
Oh, B in that, that's what you
B
meant,
of
nine
the-
B.
Oh, no.
You mean access by PRC staff to recordings?
Yeah.
Yes. And I think the chief kind of answered this question. Does anyone else have any further questions about this item?
So, I just want, so will complainants and witnesses have access to the recordings in a BOI?
At a BOI, for sure. My question to the chief tonight was, before the BOI, specifically.
Right, I mean in the process, before.
During the
yes,
investigation.
in preparation, yeah,
During the investigation.
yes.
Yeah, I need to check, but I think we're gonna get there.
Do-
I need to check, this has been gone over so many times, and so I wanna be able to check into it, but, my thoughts would be similar to what I anticipate for our internal affairs investigators, which is while they're dealing with a complainant, there's an opportunity to view the appropriate, footage. I think that'll be a little bit of a learning process for us, big us.
What about civilian witnesses, Judy?
Yeah, that's an example of where I feel like I need to check, for example,
Okay.
Does a civilian witness have a right to see other people's faces, hear other people's voices in the foot, like it seems very kind of situation dependent, about, the non-complainant seeing footage. I'm just not sure what's going on.
Okay, so maybe we'll hold off on this until we get back.
I have a question. Are we talking about during the investigation process only, or we're talking about the BOI process? I'm not clear.
Investigation.
Investigation, because at the BOI, it should only be viewed by the members of the BOI only?
No, I think we're talking about the complaint process, aren't we?
Yes.
Yeah.
So just an investigation, we're not talking about, officers and complainants, witnesses to the complaint being able to view the
Yeah,
video
we are.
during the BOI.
Well, I assume they are,
We are
Say-
talking
say
about
that
that.
again.
During the
Yeah,
BOI?
during the BOI,
No, but in
because
this,
you all are gonna have questions.
right,
I mean, it's just like any other piece of evidence.
right.
And, well,
Which is, in other words, you, just as right now, you would ask the complainant, what's a good example? I mean, maybe there's some audio, and you might ask, what was going on at that point, or maybe something wasn't clear. And you'd want to ask the complainant that.
but we're gonna pull up the
Yeah,
video.
then I think
right there.
similarly, I believe we would have
Yes.
the BOI at
Yeah.
the hearing.
But they'd be able to view it too?
Yeah.
complainant.
Who's that?
Yes,
Who's
the
that?
complainant,
He would, I would insist.
yeah. I don't think it makes sense, and,
That's right.
and the chief's okay with it, so.
You're gonna have to buy a projector?
No,
Yeah,
what I
you did.
said is what I heard.
Yes.
You get a laptop, projector, and screen.
What I said, what I heard the chief say was, I'll check into that and get back to you on it. He didn't say he was sure.
That was on, okay, that was on civilian witnesses during the investigative process, and then I suppose maybe civilian witnesses during the BOI, I
I don't know.
Okay.
I
So
have an
he's
open
gonna
mind
check
about
about
it.
Okay,
It's
so
not one
just
to
parse
say.
the two. Civilian
Let me-
witnesses is one level, the complainant
Complainant,
is the other.
okay.
Complainant, okay, all right, fair enough.
Are there any further questions?
I just wanna mention that I did some research on this body worn camera situation and found that there's a task force put out by the American Bar Association. And this is one of the issues that they discuss, and they recommend that best practices is that witnesses and complainants and civilian oversight have access to these recordings.
Alright, if there's no further discussion, we can move on to number C. Ms. Lee, would you mind giving us a short?
So how are we how are we leaving that last issue? We're just gonna, just remind us, how do we?
That the chief is going to check
Chief is
this
gonna
out
get
for
back to
us.
us.
Yes, but from our understanding, it shouldn't be an issue.
Because that's not part of the policy, that's part of the internal operating processes of the investigation of the DOI, which cannot be in the general order.
Yes. Ms. Lee, would you?
No, that's not true.
Well, the witnesses looking at the video cameras is going to be part of the, general order?
Should be.
Why not?
Who gets to access it?
Right, it's all about
Under?
who gets to see it.
You know, the
Under-
PRC access to it, I think.
If we change the board, we'll just have to go to the meeting.
Where would it fall in the general order?
Under, 425. 18.1.
What page is that?
So page 10 of the policy, that's the loose
Oh.
policy.
Okay.
Okay,
So it talks about officer and investigator. 425.18.1. You might wanna be looking at 425 rather
The
than,
first one here.
yeah, this one.
No, that's the other one.
This one. Oh, this is the policy. It's,
Page 8 or 18?
Page
Page
10.
Page.
Okay. So, I got an 18.
I know, but it's there, so you're gonna flesh out under 425.18.1A1, witness to the, complainant but not witness to the complaint. Are you gonna flesh that out, or is it saying?
I'd like it to be fleshed out.
So because you, I'm just asking, I'm not prejudging, I'm just saying, because you think that the PRC officer and PRC investigator will provide their user account access to evidence filed through the evidence management system for their use during a complaint investigation, which would infer, if it's an internal process, that witness of the complaint can see it, but maybe not, the complainant can see it, but the witness of the complaint, and to facilitate viewing by Board of Inquiry members during the Board of Inquiry.
So
It fulfills one, but maybe the second one is not fulfilled because it doesn't say what happens during the Board of Inquiry.
well, there are a couple things going on. One is, I would prefer that the policy state what the chief has orally said,
Okay.
that complainants can see it during the investigation process. And then he's gonna get back to us about whether civilian witnesses can see it. The other thing is, also Board of Inquiry members before the BOI, because this says facilitate viewing by BOI members during a Board of Inquiry, and perhaps that should be expanded to say facilitate viewing by complainants and BOI members, and then the other question of civilian witnesses.
So, I have a question, a kind of clarifying question. My intent is to be, continue to gather these various points as we consider a revision to the policy at some time in the future. It won't be in the next few weeks, it'll be at some point in the future. To clarify, and on the BOI, what kind of occurs to me, so are you suggesting that commissioners who are part of BOI would independently come in and be able to review the footage with you or with the investigator versus actually convene and then view the footage together?
Yes.
Are there any other parts of a BOI where commissioners independently come in and participate in the process? My
Well-
concern is
I have.
it breaks, okay, well, my concern is it seems to sort of break apart the BOI. I know it's not, Brown Act, but the idea that, that independently there are interactions viewing the evidence or with the investigator, or you, but each of the three commissioners has a different experience with that. There are different comments made. I don't know, I feel like it's got kind of the most integrity when it's a BOI process, and if it were to be the three commissioners who are gonna be on the BOI, maybe you create a separate sort of meeting or a prep meeting where they have the opportunity to come in together and view together. I could anticipate some concerns if it was individually. And this is uncharted territory, I'm
Sure.
just trying to.
And just for a background, a BART police department shares their videos with the board members on boards of inquiry through a Dropbox. Every single of the 11 members have access to the videos from the body-worn cameras and an investigation with allegations on the Dropbox. And every single member accesses the Dropbox, which is monitored, and watches the video. And then come to a meeting and in a closed session make decisions on the allegations based on the video and the case. So there has to be somewhere a medium here from this extreme that BART allows the police review commission to see to what your concerns are. So it's not out of the equation thing.
I understand, I'm just trying to be super clear, because I can anticipate issues.
Okay, but I would add that, so before a BOI, staff puts together what we call our report of investigation
Okay.
and the whole packet, right?
Right.
And that's got all the evidence in it,
Mhm.
which is transcripts of interviews, photographs, sometimes there's audio, and we send them a CD.
Okay.
So in my mind, body-worn camera footage is similar to that. In other words, it's part of the collection of evidence or our investigation that we
It's
give
part
to
of the
them
proffer of evidence.
before.
Okay.
So to only allow them to see it at the BOI, that makes it a little
Okay,
different.
I'm just,
But
I'm working through the issue myself.
Yeah, I'm working it out too, but I understand your concern. If the concern is, so for me, ideally, we would give it to the video on a thumb drive, but I
Mhm.
assume that you're not there yet, so. Short of that, they should be able to access it somehow. If the concern is having a conversation with us, maybe the answer is we put them in a room and they look at it and we don't talk about it. But, okay, so
Okay.
I too am just sort of thinking out
Right.
loud.
And on that point though, at the BOI meeting, we would have access.
Absolutely.
Right, because the key point
Right.
is, especially when we go into deliberations, one person may remember it this way and one person may remember it that way. And we
Right,
want to
that's,
look
the language is right there,
Yeah.
to facilitate viewing by BOI members during the BOI.
Okay.
Yeah, that part is very clear.
All right.
Yeah, just comment, this is my question here, I have a question. But just, for me, I would just look on this as, having to go in and look at it as just, I get a packet, I read it from back to front. Maybe there's an audio included, I listen to it. If we have a video of what we're talking about here, that would just be part of the thing. I don't know why we'd have to have the three of us get together. I just go and see it and I wouldn't talk about it, that would be part of the whole process. But more important, just a question here, if we're adding all this other stuff about whether or not complainants and or witnesses can view these videos, would that
Yes.
mean that we would have to redo our regulations for how the board is conducted, since we have basically a certain set of rules now, and might that lead to me to confer on this? This is a whole new ballgame. I can see where the police chief here is like maybe anticipating some of the feedback that he might get from BPA or the representatives. you know,
Anyway.
If the regulations need revising, and I'd have to think about that and read the
I think they would.
regulations. Okay,
This is a whole
But-
something we're adding to, a hearing that we've never had before.
but the regulations would reflect what's in the policy. So, to the extent that the policy requires a meet and confer, there would be no separate need. So, and if it doesn't require a meet and confer, what the regulation is reflecting what the policy says, and the policy doesn't require meet and confer, then I don't think the regulation would.
But we would need to, have this added on to the regulations.
Probably.
So not probably, I would think it'd be necessary,
Okay.
just so we have it in writing.
And something, okay, that's good, and something that I have thought of is I'm probably going to rewrite the confidentiality agreement.
Yep.
To make it more specific about viewing videos, and
Okay.
there's, for instance, you can't come in with your cell phone.
And Chief,
Copies of video.
Sheriff, if I may, the chief, that concerned, if in the instances where there's 4 or 5 police officers, and 4 or 5 recordings, and you have to sit on the board of inquiry and look at 4 or 5 recordings for the first time, it could take a long period of time. So we're talking about board of inquiries that can go from there from 4 to 8 hours, because of the process of that, and we had some board of inquiry that lasted 5 hours. So we're trying to see what's easier to minimize that
Just-
time.
Yeah, just in that light, if I could make one more point, just in that light, your example here, we could go in and individually watch it. If we have to do it the way George described, we could be in boards of inquiry for hours at a time. The only time it might be necessary to show to the whole board, if during, say, deliberations maybe, there's a point of contention of, well, I thought this, but I thought that's not the way I looked at it. Well, that's kind of like what jurors do, in a way, you know, in a regular trial. If they ask for videos or not the whole video, and they said, but just maybe a certain segment of it.
So, from my understanding, we're going to hold this off and wait for more information. Did anyone want to take action on this right now?
I'm sorry, what is the information we're hoping to, get?
Clarification, I think.
Yeah, more clarification.
I would recommend that.
Can you give me, what is the actual clarification on which?
Well, the first was whether or not civilian witnesses can view the videos during investigations. There was some questions from the chief about BOI
What?
hearings, and if commissioners will be going in separately to view the videos. Sorry, there was a lot of conversation around this.
Yeah, I mean, I think we need to be clear about where we're
Here's
at.
what the 2.
I think those were the main 2. Okay.
Will commissioners view the footage
How
separately?
how the video will be presented to commissioners, will they view it in BOI hearings, will they view it separately with the PRC officer, or will they view it together with the PRC officer?
Will BOI members have access to the body-worn camera and videos prior to the board of inquiry being completed? That's one point.
And if so,
And how.
and if so,
And
under
how,
what
Right.
conditions?
and how. And the second point is whether witnesses, not the complainant, will also have access to the footage of the body-worn camera, if you're involved in the investigation. Those are the 2, right?
So
Do you
moving
need a
on to.
motion for that, to hold this, discussion point 2 over, or just we move on?
I think we can just move on. Yeah, Ms. Lee shaking her head. Will you please give us a summary of C?
Is it a brief?
All right, moving on to topic C, activation of the body worn camera during interrogations. Originally, PRC said they should be turned on for all
So can you
interrogations.
direct this to the paragraph?
I'm sorry, so we're looking at
C.
Lexipol, 424 or 425.7, and I'm on page 17 of my memo, or page, 17 of the packet. Page 3 is my memo.
Thank you.
Mhm. So, the department's policy is that the camera should be turned on during interrogations. And then it does add, unless there are other recording devices being used. And they have to document and explain why an interview was not recorded
or if the camera was deactivated. So I think the question for the commission is whether you feel there are enough safeguards here. Because it sounds like, although the use of the body worn camera is discretionary, there has to be some other recording device being used. So there's no interrogations that are not recorded. All interrogations have to be recorded, let me put it that way, as far as I understand the way this is written.
Chief, I have a question about this. Does this involve, like, why would the body worn camera be turned off during an interrogation? Is that for exigent circumstances or just?
No, and I think I'm concerned about creating situations that you have to record all interviews. You're gonna be accountable one way or the other if you record them. And I am not recalling off the top of my head sort of what went into this paragraph.
Do you conduct interviews that are not recorded?
I imagine a circumstance where people are talking to suspects that aren't recorded.
Custodial interviews?
It's interrogation,
Sorry.
it's not an interview, it's an interrogation. Was our issue.
But they have to, the officer would have to obviously account for that in the report when it's, from an evidence point of view, a recording is obviously.
I think Allison called it custodial interviews. Allison was specific, all Commissioner Bernstein was specific on the language of custodial interviews.
Yeah, it was Allison, that really was, said this needs to be in there. That's what she felt, yeah.
I guess my concern would be if the presence of the body on camera is causing the interviewee to balk for whatever reason and not being interviewed.
Mm-hmm.
That I'd want the officer to be able to navigate those waters.
Will you call an interview the same as an interrogation? To me, they look different. Isn't there a difference?
Excuse me, can I ask you a question?
Sorry, can you say your question again, Tara?
You said interview, we're talking here about interrogation. Is that
Yeah,
different?
I said interview, I meant if somebody's,
It says
contesting
interview in
interrogation.
the policy.
Yes.
I'm a little confused
Our
about.
original was to have interrogation, in the list of when the body worn camera has to be activated.
I mean-
One of the items was interrogation.
Legally, I don't know what the difference is between
Pardon?
a custodial interrogation and a custodial
You
interview.
know the difference between what?
They're
A
the same.
custodial interview and a custodial interrogation, I think
Can
they're
I
the
just
same.
try this, not being a lawyer? From television, that they're in there talking, and to say, then after, say, reach a point, they Mirandize them, then it becomes an interrogation as opposed to a prior Mirandization, it's just an interview, we're talking on the record, at some point, they ask you, do you want a lawyer? Then it becomes an interrogation, I'm just asking these questions.
Yeah, I'm looking at this, I'm concerned about mixing interview and interrogation, which is the principle of reporting yes or no, and if no, document and explain why not.
Yes.
And I don't have the answer off the top of my head.
Me neither. I rely on the
So-
lawyers here.
Well, I
All sorts of
guess,
Yes. Sorry, Commissioner Pritchett.
I mean, I'm getting a little lost in sort of the difference between, if surreptitious use of the body worn camera is allowable, so I don't really understand. That feels like sort of a catch-all. It says members of the department may surreptitiously record any conversation during the course of a criminal investigation in which the member recently believes that such a recording will be lawful and beneficial to the investigation. I've gotten confused in recent weeks because it sounds like it's okay to surreptitiously record any interaction with the public. Does this policy does that change that?
Are we
So-
talking about the same policy, 525?
Well, I'm skipping ahead to 25.10, which talks about the surreptitious use of the body worn camera. So, I don't know, it seems like it's sort of always kind of discretionary, I guess.
Chief, do you remember why shall was changed to should in this recording of interrogations?
I think we didn't want, not being able to predict every iteration or every possible development in that interaction between investigating officer and a suspect. I'm loath to put in a shall, I wanna have should, so there's some level of discretion. If it's shall, and then for whatever reason, this is in the area of like making, speculating or creating situations every kind of situation. So I think for me, an overriding piece of this is that if you're not reporting something, you have to document and explain why. And then it's up for the judge, it's up for the DA, it's up for the defense attorney to, process the matter with that in mind.
Is there,
And so having shall is a problem. And
is there no way to record interrogations other than the body worn camera?
sure, you can have,
I mean, there's no.
in an interview
video?
room, you may have audio and video recorder in an interview
I
room.
would think that would be the way to do it.
Agreed, except what about an officer who's in the field just conducting an investigation? Not everybody who's interviewed is interviewed in an interview.
Okay,
So I
this
think a
is-
patrol officer investigating, a shoplifter or whatever, but out in the field. There needs to be flexibility and.
But when you're saying flexibility, is the flexibility about whether or not the person being interrogated or interviewed knows that they're being recorded, or they don't know that they're recorded? It sounded like what you were saying was that there are times when an officer may want this person to feel like they're not being recorded.
So the issue.
But since surreptitious recordings are allowed, it seems like that issue goes away.
There's a conflict. I agree, and I think the fundamental issue of law, and I've spoken about this with Ms. Lee, is that there is no reasonable expectation of privacy with regards to being recorded when you're talking to a police officer in the field, a uniformed police officer.
I mean, there are some people who,
But just that's the law.
I got you.
I know there's some people who may not like it or not
They might even
know
have
it.
another opinion.
They may have an opinion, but it's a matter of law.
Well, this is a matter of policy.
It's a matter of law.
Yes, I
That
understand.
there's no reasonable
I
expectation of
understand.
privacy. And
But
so-
some people feel like, that there is value in having the public actually, believe that sometimes when they're talking to a police officer, that it's not being recorded. And so I don't know what perception you as the director of the police department, what public perception you want people to have of the Berkeley Police Department. Do you want it to be that sometimes officers are genuinely, building relationship off the record? Or do you want them to be kind of, alert to the fact that everything they do is potentially being recorded? And does that perception impact the way that you're able to create police and community relationships?
On one hand, of course it does. On the other, establishing a policy that disregards the law or is that more confining than the law with regards to investigating crime is problematic.
Is somebody asking you to do that? Do you feel like?
So I feel like you're challenging me. I'm saying, so common sense is, if I'm talking, we had a discussion a few weeks ago in front of City Hall. We're talking,
I'm
I'm not
assuming,
reporting
so I
it.
should assume that that's being recorded. I didn't at the time, but now I do.
okay, well then I think you should definitely ask. I wasn't reporting it.
But you're not
so-
compelled to tell the truth.
Come on.
No, I'm serious.
Whatever. Okay, if it comes out, then sue me. My point is,
I'm
I'm
just
having
saying.
a conversation, I had a genuine conversation with you, I'm not recording it. I'm not recording it, but an enforcement, a contact with an officer who's in uniform or in a body worn camera, that, I'm just saying it's established law, and I talked to Ms. Lee about producing, producing that law for you and for the commission to understand that's a fundamental piece of law. So the fundamental piece of law is there's not a reasonable expectation of privacy and therefore you can be recorded. Is there space in the discussion about community relations, about trust? Sure,
That's what I was trying to have.
but this is about the policy of body worn camera, and it's gonna depend on law.
Right, but some departments have policies about when they do use their body worn cameras, what the absolute requirements are.
Right.
And some have say, look, if you're gonna surreptitiously record, that there should be guidelines around that.
I don't know, I've looked at a lot of policies, I've heard a lot about body worn cameras, I'm not prepared to sort of accept that. This has very clear about when the body worn camera shall be activated, and the law would provide, that, to the surreptitious recording, it's almost a separate issue. So, I don't know, I don't think I'm gonna land where, I'm not quite sure where you'd like me to land. Mandatory discussion of, hey, I'm wearing a recording and that the officers have to tell every time they're recording something. That's not a requirement by law, and I'm not going to require my officers to do that.
I hear you.
And if you're concerned about am I being recorded, for example, when you're talking to me and I'm in plain clothes, I think you can ask, I respond.
But do you respond?
But do I lie to you? No. And what's the consequence?
I don't know,
I guess
my conversation might be in Berkeley side, I don't know.
You
Move this.
never
Yes,
know.
is there anyone who wants to make any action on the surreptitious recordings or the number C? Yes, Commissioner Roberts.
Say, what did you say?
Is there any action that anyone wants to take at this time on number
letter
C?
C.
Well, you know, I was just gonna point out,
LA requires that this put on form for doing surreptitious.
the issue that we're talking about here was that they deleted the activation for interrogations out of our original proposal. So there is no, under section 450.5, I guess it would be, I'm looking at the red line, but it said activation of body cameras, you know, it shall be activated in the following circumstances, and then it lists A through F. And in that list was interrogations, all interrogations. So I mean, that's really where the issue, what the issue was with respect to the difference between our original proposal and what they came back with. And so to me, it would be more like, well, are we gonna leave it in, or are we okay with it the way it is? Now, when I say leave it in, are we gonna ask them to put it back in for the interrogation, or are we going to not ask them to put it back in?
So are there any commissioners who want to ask them to put interrogations back into the policy?
I thought it is in the policy, it's just that it says should instead of shall.
On which one?
Yeah, that's not right. Oh, here, right here.
Are we not talking about 424.7?
Or, hold on,
425.7.
424.7.
Or 425.7, whichever one you're looking at.
What page is that on the, you
Page
looking at Kathy's
29.
memo or?
The agenda for the day, page 29.
Page 29.
On 425.7,
That's
page
what we're
3,
looking at, isn't it?
last line, members should. 425.7,
Yeah, I mean,
Page
that's,
three.
that's,
Members
The one
should.
you should be looking at, the other one is.
Okay, so isn't that's talking about the interrogations?
is that what?
That's talking about interrogations.
Yeah.
So it is
Well,
in there.
before the A through F, had a G in it, and that was interrogations. And so this one is out.
Oh, I see.
You see what I'm saying? It's not included in there. Interrogations isn't included in there, but it does say towards the bottom of the page there, it's talking, it says, they should activate
So it was removed as G because they didn't wanna say shall.
shall.
So they put it
Right.
as should.
Yeah.
The chief has just described
Right.
that's.
That's what it comes down to, yeah.
Okay.
So is there anyone who would like to take action on this, or can we move to the next item?
I think we should move.
Alright, seeing as there's no action, we'll move to D. Ms. Lee, again, would you mind giving us a quick summary?
Okay, review of recordings before giving a statement or writing a report. The PRC wanted all reportable use of force in, the PRC wanted officers not to view video before, writing a report in reportable use of force incidents. In Lexipol 424.17,
425, sorry.
425.17,
Page 7.
either one, it's the same. Well, it doesn't matter, they're the same. 424.17 is the same as 425.17.
Yeah, today handout is page 7.
The only time that officers may not review, their camera footage is in a grave bodily injury or death incident, which includes officer-involved shooting or in custody death. And there are, if you go to page 8 of the policy, there's a whole set of procedures in those, grave bodily injury or death cases.
That's B, C, D, E.
Yeah,
So if I'm understanding correctly, our original stance was that we should use all use of force? It should be all use of force instead of just those two
Right.
instances? Okay.
right. I think it was all reportable use of force, wasn't it, Commissioner Yampolsky?
Yes, that was.
Use of, just said use of force.
Yeah.
Are there any commissioners who want to take action on this?
Such as.
Such as, the discussion point that Ms. Lee outlined, should we reiterate our original position, or are we fine with the policy as is?
Okay.
I think we should reiterate.
Yeah. Is there a motion on the floor?
Hold on here. I think, as I'm recalling my notes here, looking at my notes, BPD has included in the, has included great bodily injury in their proposal. We had that in our proposal, but we also had use of force
Yeah.
for, yeah. So use of force has been taken out, great bodily injury has been put in there. And I'm not sure what, we never did really define great bodily injury, so I'm not sure what that would be. But it's in there, so they would have what we call the state of mind, report before they could review the tape. And so that would apply to grave bodily injury, death, or officer-involved shooting. So they've come part way, if we can figure out, make sure we know what grave bodily injury is. So I think that gets us a ways to where we wanted to go. That's kind of my feeling about it. Because there was not a total agreement on the commission at that time if we should include all use of force or not.
Is there a reason not to include all use of force?
Is there any what?
A reason not to include all use of force?
No, not in my estimation. I think there's, I think you'd have to define it, the chief can come in here now, but unreportable or whatever, there are different levels of use of force. There's a level 1 and level 2 and level 3 or whatever they call it. Level 1 could mean the officer he's almost gonna grab you, but he doesn't grab you, right? That's level 1. It's like exerting your force. So I think, use of force, if we're gonna put it in there, should have, should have a way to define what we're talking about there. Significant use of force.
Great bodily harm or injury is defined under California law. has a specific definition.
It does?
Yeah, just because you put great bodily injury, it refers to the California law, the definition of California law.
Uh-huh.
Great bodily, this is California law, great bodily injury is sometimes referred to as GBI or great bodily harm. It is a legal term that basically means what it says, great bodily injury. Significant substantial injuries fall under this category. By contrast, significant or even moderate injuries do not. Any person who inflicts great bodily injury on any person other than an accomplice in the commission of a lawful act. It is all defined bodily injury which creates a high probability of death or which causes permanent disfigurement or which causes a permanent or protracted loss of impairment of the function of any bodily member or organ or other seriously bodily harm. It is California law, it is defined.
Mhm.
So just have it there as a definition of the law.
So it is defined, I mean, that's an important point, I think.
It is.
Yeah.
So it is everything. It is a puncture of a lung to disfigurement to whatever it is.
Thank you, George.
Yeah.
Commissioner Pritchett?
Does that, I wonder if that includes, non-lethal, less lethal, projectiles, like the FN 303 that we were looking at?
It could or could not, depending on the impact. If you shoot somebody with a less lethal in the eye and take their eye out, that would
That's right.
probably be great bodily injury.
That's right.
Right, but if it gives you a bruise, that's probably not.
Alright, so is there a motion from the commission, or are we not going to take any action on this?
Well, I'd like to hear from the chief about what your, I mean, we had this discussion some time ago, but, you know, commend the department for where it's come in terms of accepting the idea of it, accepting this construct with serious bodily, with respect to serious bodily injury, or rather grave bodily injury. But what is the issue with other lesser uses of force for the same kind of reporting requirement?
So, if we are using other uses of force, then we're expecting an officer to write a report, submit it for supervisor review, and then have a chance to look at their own body worn camera footage, and then potentially submit another report if there are changes or there are additional information that they want to include. It's, in terms of our process, it's completely, it's problematic in terms of our process. So if it takes a while for them to write the report, it takes a while for it to go in the system, the supervisor would have to report it, then they get to view it, and then if they wanna write an additional report, I think it's like that's just a clunky process. I also, from my fundamental kind of principle, is officers are gathering information and gathering evidence all the time. We count on them to recount what they saw, what they did, and why. And the capturing of their body-worn camera footage, where there's not grave bodily injury or death, is simply allowing them to look at another piece of evidence that they've captured in terms of preparing their report. I guess that's it. I feel like I might be missing something or not.
I mean, I guess
eloquent on it, but
the counterpoint to that is that uses of force are some of the most sensitive interactions that officers have with citizens, right? I mean,
Sure.
it gets down to that fundamental monopoly on force that we give the police as a society, right? And that nobody else has. And so when you're talking about those instances, which are pretty few as far as we understand from the department, we're talking 40 to 50 a year. The officers' recounting of that incident should not be allowed to be conformed to what the video shows, and should be a pure and sort of unmediated account, right, of the person's state of mind at the time of the occurrence.
I understand that perspective. I think the counterbalance is that the video evidence shows what it shows. And the concern about conforming a report, I understand it, but ultimately, the video shows what it shows. And if the report somehow, somehow is problematic, then that'll be an issue to be dealt with the officer.
But you would never know that because
So
the report and the video
What,
will be
what,
consistent.
this is kind of set as it is also felt as a gotcha. So you undergo something, you write a report, which then has to get submitted into our system and approved to be locked down.
Mhm.
And I think that assumes that would happen in the scenario we're talking about. So all that, just so then the officer can see it, and if there's some other aspect to it that they don't recall, I think it's very much felt would be felt as a gotcha.
Why is it not a gotcha when it comes to instances of great bodily harm? The less lethal round that hits somebody in the eye and takes their eye out.
Well, then you have, I feel like it's the level, the severity of the injury, we don't take body worn cameras from folks for lesser uses of force, and that's due to the significance and severity of the injury, right?
I think the definition is based on the discussion of excessive use of force, and whether excessive use of force caused bodily harm or death. That's the threshold. I mean, I understand the point here. I'd rather we would focus on having a lower threshold reporting of use of force, which is one of the recommendations for the PCE reporting. Because if we're talking about a hold and grab, that's a use of force. And that can start as basic as that, as a dynamic takedown, as to the use of handcuffs with someone. And if everything is a use of force, and we know that police officers don't work on an incremental use of force, or the pyramid of incremental use of force anymore, I'd rather we have a discussion when it comes to use of force, than having every single incident of use of force be reported, and it goes all through a process in which it's reviewed, and it goes through a process and goes through a blue panel, and it gets investigated for improper use of force, not deadly use of force or excessive use of force. I think that's a much bigger view for us to look at how we evaluate use of force acts or allegations or actions, than to having someone on the grab hold because it's a use of force, not be able to look at the camera and having to file a report without looking at it. So that's a basic point here, but it can translate everywhere else. I think that this use of force kind of review might not get us the biggest bang for the dollar.
I know what.
The biggest bang for the dollar. I think the review on the general order policy use of force and what's reportable and how that's reportable might be a much better process for us to look at how we look at uses of force in the department. Not necessarily whether a whole grab, and not be looking at the camera before you write a report. That's a little excessive.
I actually want to agree with your point. I think it is very important that, I think that, I'm not saying in every single instance that an officer is going to use this camera footage to conform his statement to it, but especially for us in VOI hearings, I think most of the situations that we are going to be looking at are going to involve use of force, and in those instances, it's gonna be, I just think that in those instances, it's very important that we have all the information and that we know that the officer's report is what he believes that he saw at the time, not what the camera captured, because the camera's not gonna capture every single thing that was happening in the moment. And I don't really see I understand that it is kind of a lot of extra work and a lot of administrative issues, but I think also outlined here by Ms. Lee, it says that, if I can find it, there are about 50 use of force incidents per year, 40 to 50 use of force incidents, which doesn't seem like enough to really justify that this is putting a huge burden on the department for that, so that's sort of my feeling.
And I think one point here in terms of the process, at least in our proposal originally, was that, the officer involved shooting and the grave bodily injury and in custody death, that kind of thing. The supervisor would come in and, as you were stating, and actually take the recordings, all that. In the use of force part of our proposal, that wasn't required. Basically, we relied on the technology to date and timestamp when the reports would occur. And so if in fact it was a state of mind report first. You would write your report, file your report, it would date, timestamp. You would look at the recording, there would be a time stamp on that. You would show that you looked at the recording after you wrote the report, and if you wrote a supplemental, that would be date, time stamp when you went in. And so if there were no further actions necessary or follow-up by supervisors, then there would be nothing left. It would be on file, but there would be no further action. So it wasn't that, in our proposal, that the supervisors would come in each case and have to do more rigorous reporting.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking, and how would we, so I think I am under-describing and we are underestimating what we're talking about here. We're kind of clinically thinking that moment of the use of force, but the body-worn camera is going to be on for a bunch of other, for that, entire interaction, that case. And so to suggest that, and there's not a way to splice that up somehow and just say, isolate the moment of the use of force with other stuff that's going on. I'm actually starting to think like that's not just about not possible, not practical. Your officers are wearing this gear. It's capturing this information. We expect them in all other, somehow we expect them in all, not somehow, we expect them in all other aspects to be gathering information, reviewing evidence, writing a full comprehensive report, and to disallow them from looking at one portion of the evidence is problematic. It's I understand. It's not to say I don't understand it, but from a perspective of a working, I think a working police officer, it's problematic. Like, okay, are you going to not let the cops see all the, say they're recording for an hour or half an hour, and then there's the use of force. So now, in terms of doing their work, all the officers who might have been there at that moment force was used are not going to be allowed to look at their video footage otherwise relating to the event. I think it's impractical in ways that I'm just beginning to sort of wrap my head around. I just feel so strongly like the video is going to show what the video shows. When you are in your role in the board of evaluating, is there a policy violation? Did the officer violate policy and what went on here? You are going to look at that video. The video is going to be very compelling, right? So,
I think I've misunderstood or something. I don't think we're talking about not seeing just a moment of force. We're talking about the entire incident.
So-
The context.
so you would disallow the officer from viewing their
I
video
would think that
of
would
an
be-
entire incident while they're writing a report?
I think that
Yeah,
that's
the
what
first
this
pass.
is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For the first pass.
For the first pass.
Yeah, I
And-
think they should.
And then if upon viewing the video, the officer feels the need to make corrections to material, details, then that's done.
I think there's a substantial amount of process that renders that impractical. I would have a real problem with that.
So you believe it's okay if there was a grave bodily injury, you support this process, but if there's something that falls short of grave bodily injury, you feel it's too cumbersome? Is that what I'm just trying to understand what you're saying.
Well, if there's that level of grave bodily injury or death, it does trigger off a whole bunch of other process. And if there's not, that process isn't triggered. So,
But if somebody
I'm just
required to.
understand what you are suggesting. I want you to write a report, submit it, have a supervisor approve it, and I'm telling you takes time. You laugh, but
No,
it
I'm
takes
saying,
time.
of course it takes time.
No, it takes a lot of time. For a baton strike,
Well,
you know,
a
for-
baton strike is a serious incident. I mean,
it
it's
takes a
our
substantial
bodies.
amount of time, and then the officer, then only then are they allowed to view the evidence that they captured. It's problematic. It feels like kind of a setup or a gotcha. That's how I think it likely feels to officer doing the actual work. And I don't see the balance of value tipping that for every use of force, the officers be required to prepare, submit, approve a report, and then view it. And so maybe we just fundamentally disagree. I think I understand what the issues are.
Can I ask a detail about this? Are witness officers included in this particular policy?
For the
Officers who are
GBI,
also
for
on
great
the
bodily
scene?
injury? Yes. And I'm also now thinking like, moving off of this, that absolutely will trigger reopen the meet and confer. I would suggest that the commission on this issue allow us to move with this policy, and I think that if problems crop up, we're gonna have an opportunity to see that. And then when we have a discussion based on those issues, I feel like then I think we should have that discussion.
Okay.
But
Just
Yes.
one last question on, you were mentioning the supervisor reviewing the report.
Mhm.
Does supervisor review every report,
yes,
no matter what situation it is?
Yes.
The supervisor will review the
They type the
report after
report.
it's written?
they type the report into the system and supervisor approves it, and that's what locks it down.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Well, on the same, in the event of a critical incident that results in grave bodily injury or death, including an officer-involved shooting, the BWC of the involved member shall be taken from him or her and secured by a supervisor, commander, or appropriate as necessary. According to this, I mean, this conflicts a bit with what we were talking about before in terms of depending, is it the body worn camera or is it the device upon which the evidence has been collected? And again, just because I like to see the problem, if I can't, if the officer, he or she recorded it on the iPhone portion, does that mean that the iPhone will also be secured in that way? And that leads to the next question of if evidence was collected on a personal iPhone in one of these exigent circumstances, would we expect that the iPhone would be
Seized as evidence, holding
yes.
evidence.
taken from him or her and secured by a supervisor? But right now, the wording is only BWC. It doesn't account for either a department-issued iPhone or a personal recording device.
I agree. Would you like to make a motion for that?
I mean, we can make a motion that says the BWC or department-issued iPhone will be taken and secured by a supervisor. I think there's something different, and legally I'm not quite sure, but I don't know. I mean, there's lawyers here. If an officer had evidence on their individual iPhone, could it be taken? Would it be taken?
Richard, the problem is that we did an amendment change for any recording device within the same general order, in the prior entry on the general order. So if I take the same language on this here, so it matches the other one.
Great, Brianna?
I think any other recording device that was used on the other one probably will fit well here, and I think you're correct. It doesn't address it at all, so it should address it. I think the addition of that to match the other one,
I mean, the one we did earlier here tonight.
the same
Yeah.
language.
But it feels like I'm just curious about what the legalities or what the processing, asking any person to surrender their cell phone, their personal cell phone, is a different animal than asking them to surrender their department-issued iPhone. So I'm just curious or maybe it's the same, I don't know. I mean, I'll let the lawyers rip on that, but.
It could be any recording device if used in lieu of the body worn camera. So the moment that
Her question is there any difference legally, given that it's the individual persons? And my sense, I don't know the law on this, but my guess is, should never guess these things, that you pretty much, as a matter of departmental policy, give up the confidentiality in your
Right.
in your stuff.
In your
Yeah, I mean,
personal cell phone.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think an investigative team on officer involved shooting, if they became aware somebody had taken photographs or video
Right.
with their device,
Right.
like, you know, that they would take that as evidence. I think that would just happen, regardless of
They would
department.
take the phone, or they would,
Yes.
okay, I'm just,
Yeah, no,
that's
just to be clear.
surprising to me, actually.
Well,
Because it was
if-
used, because it was used
I'm
instead of a
saying if you
camera?
had an officer involved shooting, so you have officer involved shooting, and again, people flow to that. So there's very little alone time when you're involved in officer involved shooting. Usually they're, in my experience, we don't have them very often, the last one was 2012. You're gonna have a lot of people flowing to that. And if a supervisor determines that someone took photographs or video with their iPhone or the department, whatever the phone is, who owns it, doesn't matter, it's evidence at that point, I would suspect it would be recovered right there.
But I'm asking, you know, does recovery mean forwarding the pictures, or does it mean taking the cell phone?
I think it means taking the cell phone.
Well, that's kind of, doesn't that feel like a big deal? I mean, am I overly attached to my cell phone? Because I would imagine there would be resistance to that, and that's why I feel like if that is the truth, it should be explicit in this policy.
Well, I think we should make it explicit then.
All right.
Well, I think we should be careful about making explicit every possible truth in every policy. I'm telling you the way those go. I'm not an experienced homicide investigator, so I'm trying, in order to have a conversation, I'm speaking frankly and candidly to the best of my ability. I would expect that if an investigator became aware that there's footage on a phone, they're going to take it for that moment. They're gonna do that. I don't think there's any policy about it. It's just.
Well,
that's
we
gonna
can put the
happen.
language in and just to make sure, just to clear up any kind of confusion that people might have.
Well, I don't have
So
any.
instead of BWC, or I would just put, or any recording device. I'm on 425.17.1A. 425.17.1,
Point one,
section A, first sentence.
17, there's no one.
The BWC or the involved member shall be taken from him or her. So what would I say, the BWC or any device used to record in addition to or in lieu of.
This is October 12th, that's the one I'm using.
This is confusing.
I know.
Yeah, look at the pageness at the bottom, right here. Tell you the
Page
date,
7.
the date, and then the page is 7. Yeah.
Okay, Commissioner Pritchett, you're making a motion.
Yes. BWC, I mean, if anybody wants to.
What do you want,
offer
Dave?
language, I'm happy to-
Dave,
Correct.
and can you
So
read
it
that
says,
again?
where it says, in the event of a critical incident that results in grave bodily injury or death, including an officer involved shooting or an in-custody death, the BWC of the involved member or members shall be taken from him or her and secured, etc. So what I'm trying to offer is that the BWC or
And any other devices,
what's that?
and any other recording devices.
Yeah. And any
Well, not all recording
Any other
devices,
devices
only
used to
one was used in them.
any other devices used
And any other
to
recording devices used.
capture evidence of the incident shall be taken from him or her and secured.
Okay, there's a motion. Is there a second to the motion?
Any other device
Is
used
the-
to capture?
Evidence of the incident. And I don't know if we need to spell out any other recording devices,
Yeah.
just to specify.
Is there any discussion on the motion?
I might just point out, so I don't know if there are other places in our other policies that would call out to what's going on with a shooting investigation, officer involved shooting investigation. So, I'm just pointing that out. It may be covered elsewhere, that issue about capturing recordings. I don't know. I'm frankly very ill at ease just to set your expectation, I'm very ill at ease with saying this is gonna work, or that I would do this without, input from, my folks who are more experienced in these issues than I am.
Ms. Lee, would you mind reading the motion document?
The motion is in 425.17.1A to insert, after the BWC, or any other recording device used to capture evidence of the incident. No, not after BWC,
That, it says after the comma of death, after death.
That's a red line.
It's a big comma there.
I'm sorry, where does that phrase go?
So, or an in custody death, comma,
Uh-huh,
insert the BWC and any other recording devices used to capture evidence of the incident.
okay, that's where I had it, but then we've got of the involved members.
I'm sorry, the BWC of the involved members, the
How about
BWC
the BWC
of the involved
and
members
other
and any other recording
devices
devices, thank you.
Okay,
Is there any further discussion on this motion? If not, all in favor, please raise your hand.
What was it? No?
On the motion?
On the motion, okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
All in favor, please raise your hand. All opposed? Abstentions?
I have a question as to whether this is captured already in what we talked about earlier in terms of the use of personal devices. It says that the videos will be, retained.
Fully consistent with the policy.
Huh?
Fully consistent with the policy. Right, with the rest of the policy.
Right, but I'm just thinking maybe it was already captured by the previous,
in the section we voted on,
Commissioner, are you saying that it's redundant?
25.13, it says that any personal recording device that's used, the videos will be, taken from the officer and retained by the department.
We did already vote on the issue though.
Yeah, this,
I know, my point is this redundant with that?
I don't think so.
Commissioner,
I think that
is
was more
that-
talking about ownership. This is more talking about a
I think it's
police action. In other words, this is about after an incident, what would happen, right, on four
Right, and the
twenty-five
other one
point
was
one
about,
seven.
the other one was about in every case, the personal video.
Which section is that? Why don't we look at that again?
425.13.
0.13.
Commissioner Calderon, I think retention is referring to 425.15.
Just a reminder, a vote did happen, so unless somebody's gonna do a
That's
motion
right.
to reopen the.
What?
The
We did
vote
actually
already
vote.
happened, so
Prohibited
there's
use.
just gonna be a motion to reopen.
No, I'm not saying reopen, I agree, I'm not saying that, I'm saying I think that we don't need this new wording because we already covered it when we voted
But
that way.
we already added it.
Are you
We already
talking?
voted on
All right,
it.
never mind.
Yes.
Excuse me. Never mind.
Chair, yes.
Who abstained on that? I got
I abstained
Polsky,
because I think it's-
Paracelas,
yeah.
and Calderon,
Calamita, Polsky, and myself.
okay, actually, and Sherman was absent, so I think that motion did not pass.
Can we,
No.
where was it? Is it possible to revisit the motion?
1, 2, it was 4 yes, 4
Four
yes,
yes,
3
three abstentions, and two absent, counting Commissioner Ramsey.
Is the vote concluded at any particular time? I mean, is there time limit for concluding the vote? If somebody would read you the motion, I would be able to.
That would include.
Sorry, we should have.
Right?
Yeah.
Right now, we have to determine whether the vote passed or not, and then based on that, a substitute motion could be made, the vote
Wait,
has to
you said
happen.
the vote did not.
Correct.
Okay, she's returning that, she's determining whether it passed or not passed,
You
right?
said it didn't.
It-
It didn't
He's
say.
revisiting
She
it.
said it did not.
She's
It did not
revisiting it.
pass. No, I'm not revisiting it.
It didn't pass.
Okay, here's what I have, ayes, Allenby, Matthews, Pritchett, Roberts, and Roberts. Abstentions, Yampolsky, Perez-Villas, Calavita. Absent, Sherman and Ramsey.
So, Ms. Lee,
It passed,
So
didn't it?
that's four.
Can we-
Commissioner
four
Calavita,
to
I believe you
three.
did raise your hand for yes, and then changed your vote later.
No, I didn't.
Oh,
I didn't raise
okay.
my hand.
Okay.
I raised my hand because I had a
That's
question.
4 ayes,
It was four.
Three.
4 ayes,
So we
3
passed,
abstentions,
yeah.
and 2 absents.
Yeah, so. we
Okay,
passed.
that does pass, I'm sorry.
Doesn't pass, right?
It does,
It
Yeah.
does.
it does.
The abstentions count as a zero,
Right.
the majority ayes have it.
Right.
Okay.
Oh, I see.
Abstention
Right.
is no vote. So you
That's
don't-
right.
So the last issue we have to discuss on this section is whether or not we want to revisit the use of force or
I
not, so,
I have a thought on that.
yes.
Chief, are all the use, well, number one is on this particular issue, the reason I voted for it is because it's a recommendation for the chief to look at. I presume that when he looks at it in the context of his world, he will come back with some kind of a response to say yes or no, or something in between. Secondly, on the, what are we doing here? This was, question for the chief. On use of force, whatever you call use of force, is there a use of force report filed every time there is a use of force?
The report, yes,
There would be.
I mean-
Any kind of use of force?
on our current definitions, yes.
There is.
Yeah, the current definition,
Under
the
the-
current,
Huh?
so,
Yes, there is, right?
so comments aside,
Definition.
the current use of force policy is to report all uses of force where there's an injury, a complaint of pain,
Oh, yeah.
physical
yeah, yeah.
injury,
But
or use of a weapon. That's our
isn't that
policy right
being
now.
Changed, in the process of being changed or not?
I'm going to revisit it, and we've had some discussion about it. It's obviously gonna have to go through a meet and confer. But where I think,
I'm sorry, I'm searching my mind. I thought there was a court settlement and a requirement around use of force reporting.
that settlement didn't revise our use of force policy.
It didn't get revised?
It didn't require, yeah, you're conflating and mixing two different things. So,
Okay.
so in our use of force policy, if there's visible injury or complaint of pain or use of any weapon,
Yeah.
then it's reported. With
Yeah.
a use of force report, it's a specific report, supervisor fills it out, it ultimately gets reviewed and comes up through the chain of command, including me, to review the report, the documentation, evidence, for example, photographs, and now we'll have body-worn camera footage, to make a finding as to whether or not that use of force is within policy.
Okay, so is that available to us? If we ask you, will you give us this use of force policy, or use of force reports?
Not sure, it seems personnel filing, I don't think so.
That's been asked.
Huh?
Yeah.
That question has been asked, and
Resolve.
the city attorney has said no.
It's not available to us.
No.
Yeah, I don't, so I think three different things here, if I may. There is a recommendation by the court to re-examine the use of force, not a directive to change it. There's a CPE recommendation to revisit the use of force policy. And there's a discussion that we have had on changing the general order use of policy to lower the threshold on the reporting standards. Those are three different things.
Right.
That's what we are. So, for clarity.
Okay, so where I was headed on this, to explain, was, I was going to suggest that we go with the chief's proposal, and that is that we, use, in the bigger picture, their, grave bodily injury or death, that kind of thing, plus the amendments we just approved. And then monitor, what's going on the use of force. But my idea is that if we could get use of force reports, or a summary of them or something like that, then we could monitor and see what's going on if we wanted to re-engage the issue. So is there a way to get a summary or something?
I'm not sure, I do believe this whole thing has been hashed out with the, city attorney in the past, and I don't have a specific recall of timing and, the full issues.
George, did
I
you?
think the difference here, we're not asking for use of force report on a use of force report. I mean, like a BART, I get November 50 uses of force, September 80 uses of force, compared to 2016, 2017, 2015. So uses of force reports, not use of force reports themselves, right? So whether we get a report saying in November 2018, we had 60 uses of force, right? Whether that's something we can get, necessarily have to look at all the uses of force individually, because we understand they could be part of an allegation, internal affairs investigation, and part of a personnel file. I think there's two different things here,
Yeah, yeah.
right?
Well, a summary though wouldn't really get us where we need to look at the details, so.
But it will show you whether there's a pattern, not a pattern, whether
Yeah,
an
yeah.
increase or increase, whether
Yeah.
the uses of force that we're having, if you have 5 allegations in the PRC of uses of force, but there's 60 that are being reported, then you have to, which ones of those went to internal affairs, it was an investigation, that all can be hashed out somehow, but right now you don't know how many uses of force
Right.
were reported in
Right.
November 2018, you just don't know.
Okay, that was my question.
But different question, Chief.
I'm sorry, I'm trying to understand what you're saying. You're saying, are you including, kicks and punches and as, in your understanding of what uses of force are?
So to me, in the perfect world, a grab hold is a use of force, and that has to be reported. That all the way to a kick and a punch, a dynamic takedown, use of beanbag, whatever it is. In a perfect world, like San Francisco does, and Oakland does now, and BART does, every single use of force is reportable use of force. So in a perfect world, I like to know that every single time a police officer engages in all kinds of use of force, they're reported and they're reviewed all the way to chain of command, and that is. In the perfect world for me, we would get on a regular basis a reporting of how many uses of force there are. Not the particulars, just a review, because I do get them. So that's in the perfect world. The other one is a much different conversation. And we know that the district attorney has said no to that.
Chair, I did not get the seconder to Commissioner Pritchard's motion.
It was Commissioner Allenby.
Okay, thank
Yeah.
you.
Well, I think we're gonna have to revisit that use of force reporting thing, cause, well, cause Rachel Letterman, in the lawsuit from 2014, I mean, I have emails where she's saying that yes, according to her understanding of the lawsuit, kicks and punches are included in reportable uses of force.
No,
George-
yeah,
discharge of a firearm at a person and death and great bodily injury. So contrary to what I thought I heard someone say, those reports would be available publicly and perforce to the commission in the event that you issued a request for that. And that's by virtue of this newly enacted law. And I know there's a lot of talking about use of force reporting, and that the legislature has actually updated things now. And I'm not sure that the discussion actually took account of that change to the law, but it is out there. And I guess with that, we'll go to the next meeting. Thank you.
On that score, the prior Public Records Act request, which was denied by the department, was done under then existing law, which is before this SB 14, whatever, passed. Right. So the result
Well,
was.
it technically wasn't a PRA request, it was just one of the requests that we made.
I thought that there was a
You
PRA
thought it was a
request.
PRA?
I believe there
From
was.
the commission?
No.
Oh,
And just for the commissioner's knowledge, a PRA request is not the same thing, and there's some certain standards, because I worked with Nancy Skinner in the writing of this. It's different standards, it doesn't, but we're in public comment, so we should move on, sorry.
Yes, thank you. Is there any more public comment? Please. I'll just stand up somewhere. My name is Christine Schwartz, and as you know, I've been videotaping all of your PRC meetings. Thank you for allowing me to. It's been going out to a lot of people in our community, and I just hope to enrich everybody who's watching and actually encourage them to come and speak on several issues. I also wanted to thank you for allowing Sergeant Spencer Fomby, to come do an excellent presentation on de-escalation training for officers, and I thought that was very useful for everybody's understanding. In addition, for the San Pablo Park issue, I was wondering if we were going to have, or if we have anywhere else in our city, shot spotters. Do we know?
Shop spotters?
Shot spotters.
Oh, shop spotters.
Are you asking the chief, or you asking
Yes,
us?
please, Chief.
UC Berkeley has,
Public comment is not the moment to answer questions from
Oh.
the public.
We
I
can
can
talk
talk to you
offline.
after.
Okay.
Sorry.
I just think that it would be very useful in the situation with the San Pablo Park situation and other places to be able to identify where the location is of a particular shot and make the job easier of police officers. Given the situation that people, when experiencing gunfire, don't want to receive retaliation for reporting such a incident or crime, as you would be aware. So thank you very much for your time. Thank you. Yes.
A real quick comment on shot spotter there, and that is, I understand in Oakland, they've had quite a few difficulties with exact location of the shots fired not being exactly recorded specifically on shot spotter, plus a microphone apparently can hear conversations around where the shot spotter is located. So those of us who have questions and are questioning the surveillance state as it grows in this country, I would recommend highly against any other surreptitious surveillance like via shot spotter.
Thank you.